Welcome, everyone. We are going to call the joint meeting of the school committee, the finance committee, and the select board to order at 7:05 p.m. Just a couple things. Housekeeping items. We do not have a PA system tonight. We were lucky enough to have B&C join us. They already had two other commitments tonight, so we wanted to make sure this got recorded and was available for people who couldn't make it. If you're having trouble hearing us, please just let us know, and we'll do our best to project better. If, when we get to any questions from the audience, we'd ask that anyone who's going to speak comes up to the table here. We have the mic and a camera. State your name, and then ask your question or have that dialogue at that time so that we can ensure that we get everything on the recording. So the joint topic is, discussion regarding the Erving Elementary School budget, concerns that the community expressed to the select board on the the April 10th select board meeting, and then discussions about what a 2.5 override process looks like, just to understand it. And that's probably going to be just procedural for everyone to understand it. It's not something that I think anyone sitting at these tables has done or has done in many years. So if that is something that becomes a reality, we've talked about it with the IP mail. It has been brought up around budget this year as well. We all kind of talk through what all of those steps look like. And just to open, I asked both the finance committee and the school committee if they would be open to having this joint meeting, because there was a lot of concerns raised and a lot of things that were discussed at that board meeting that I think gave everyone there pause and concern. And I was hoping to kind of have a dialogue here with all parties present to kind of try to understand better what's the situation, what has transpired over the last years that may be contributing to where we are, if those are factors, and what does improving that, if there are systemic issues or concerns, look like. Obviously, at the end of the day, these decisions aren't the select board's, but I appreciate the school committee being willing to come and the administration to discuss this with us and try to see where we are and understand what going forward may need to get done. Does that make sense to all of you? Mm-hmm. So with that, does anyone have something they want to start with? It's open.
I just have one thing to say. In situations like this, there's always a potential for people to say things in a way that creates a let's butt heads as we against them, or school against the highway, or whatever it is. And I would just encourage everybody, as much as you can, say things however you want. It's free country, say what you want. But I would encourage everybody, try to say things in a reasonable way. We're all in this together. We all want the kids to get a good education. Nobody here doesn't want that. And we have taxpayers who want the taxes to stay as low as they can while we still get the good education. We're all in it together. And sometimes what you read in the newspaper isn't exactly how meetings turned out. What I read when I read the paper was there'll be no preschool. That's not the case at all. And it will upset a lot of people with kids, for sure. It's just one thing. And so I'd encourage you, if you read something or hear something, you're talking to your neighbor, check it out a little more so you get the full story instead of just believing one thing and off you go. Because if we don't do this as a team, we create long-lasting bad relationships. So that was just a thought. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
I would just like to say I agree, and I would like to echo what you said, just working together and collaborating. I think that's the whole point of this meeting, to kind of get all on the same page and to work together. And I think that's our end goal for this evening.
I did think of one other example. The thing I read was, I don't know who wrote it, doesn't matter. Supposedly somebody said, well, to the school, well, if you don't cut it, we're gonna. There was never any attitude like that. That's the attitude that came across to me, what I read. There's never been an attitude like that. We're always thoughtful about people's jobs and kids' education. There's never been, from the Finance Committee, the Select Board, I haven't been at the school committee meetings, but there's never been that attitude from us of, you know, my gosh, you don't do it, we're gonna show you. It's nothing like that. We all wanna work together. So, thank you.
I'd like to just follow up on what Dan said. I know there was, at our last meeting, there was I believe one of the parents stated in that meeting that they were concerned about preschool education and whether that would continue or would there be some doubt about that program continuing as it has for many years. And I just want to reiterate on what Dan said. Preschool education is extremely important, and I don't believe, I know for myself that preschool education will continue in the form that it has been, and I see no reason for it to change. It's an important aspect of education and where our children are and where they're going. And I just want to assure parents that before they leave here today that we all believe, the board believes that preschool education is a must. And I know as I sit here, I will be working toward that and seeing that it happens in all its best ways.
Thanks, Bill. I think I'm just going to kind of taking from that, and there was a lot of concern around preschool. I read briefly the news article, or a news article about it, which sounded very much like it wasn't happening. And unfortunately, we were having very poor audio through our remote with the principal. So whether some of the things she was trying to convey or not came through clearly, I don't know that they did. Could someone speak to kind of the perception that's been put out there, because there has been in the news that some the preschool teachers were pink slipped, so to speak, and yet we have no plans to discontinue preschool. Can someone maybe connect the dots there for the greater audience to how we're going to how that looks, and understand how we're at A but B is still true?
We still have preschool. We have preschool through grade 6 at Erving Elementary. And when we went through the process of reduction in force, we followed the statute, which is Chapter 71, Section 42. We also followed the language in the collective bargaining agreement. And the language in our collective bargaining agreement follows statute. We also met with the union. We conferred with the president. We had an agreement around the prepared list of non-professionally status teachers to be reduced. And then we met personally with the affected staff, along with the union president, and then letters were sent out by the statutory date. So there was a process we followed. The process is governed by statute. However, all grades remain at Erving Elementary.
Okay. So in short, you were following what you had to procedurally for what the budget was indicating we may have to do.
Correct.
To balance, but change in force does not mean a change in offered grades.
Correct.
Jen, do you mind just speaking a little more of like an example of what that statute is? So looking at, like, there's a process to it, and I don't know it by, you probably know it better than me, but it follows, who has what certification, it follows professional status, it follows that. So like, what are some of the things that you had to look at to then make that determination? Because I think part of that frustration that's being felt or heard is that it just so happens that after following all those procedures that it was the 2 preschool teachers that were cut. But if they were in a different grade with the same status that they have, that may have not been the case.
So reduction in force always starts with non-professional status teachers. And we had a list of teachers that were non-professionally statused. And the statute states no teacher with professional teacher status shall be laid off pursuant to a reduction in force or reorganization if there is a teacher without such status. So that's what we followed. We consulted legal counsel, we consulted the statute, and we consulted with the collective bargaining agreement.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And being one of the lesser kind of informed about the nuance of all of school and MGL that relates to that, is it also correct that just because they were notified does not mean that they may not have a place next year, depending on how everything falls out once the year starts or as you get into the new school year?
Well, with the budget currently as it is, that reduction in force would remain in place. If the budget changed, as it does with any reduction in force, if the budget increased, then people would come back.
Thank you.
If that's where the money needed to be put.
Correct,
I
right.
th-
If
like,
we
that's-
were
that's
bringing
just-
staff back, yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the caveat there.
Thank you for clarifying.
It at least helps me connect the dots. I
Yes.
appreciate it.
Thank you for asking. I'm sure it helped more than you get some clarification, so I appreciate the question.
Hopefully. They sound incongruent, so to hear how they work together is good. Does someone else have something they would like to understand or question or clarity on anything specific? No, please?
I talk a lot, but I'd like to say one other thing. I think it's important. It could be, everybody here understands it. Maybe somebody will watch it on TV who doesn't understand it. It would be good to understand, I think. We started out with Finance Committee, Select Board joint meetings, and we asked for budget requests. And so the requests totaled up, and we only raised about so much money. They call it the levy limit, is how much money we can spend. And we started out, and what we were asked for was about $1.7 million more than what we had to spend. So the school is the biggest part of the budget here, for sure, everybody knows that. But we reduced that $1.7 million down to somewhere around 300,000 or so. Is that about right? That other departments, we found ways to either cut the budget or not do something we planned to do. We didn't just we didn't begin with a lack of money and say the school has to give us all the cuts. We didn't do that. Out of 1.7 million, we whittled it down to around 300,000 or so. Is that about right?
The school cut.
Yeah.
I don't have the
In
exact
order to get a
numbers, but
balanced
Brian may have them. But it was over 1 million negative when we rolled up what was requested from all departments and all, assessments and everything else that goes into that. The overall shortfall was over 1 million. And through all the efforts of the school committee and the school administration, as well as all the town departments, and kind of to Dan, what you said, just about a third is education, about a third is, or more than a third is education, about a third is Erving Elementary, about a third is town departments of all other sorts, and then about a third of it is the other things, benefits, insurance, things that we have to pay. So when you look at that, basically the town departments cut close to $500,000, school, I'm going to get the number wrong, but I want to say you guys probably got close to 400,000 from where you started. Yeah, from like your first proposal, like kind of, is it 3, 4, somewhere in there?
Yes.
I don't have it.
We did 214, about 2 in personnel and then some in non-personnel.
Okay. So over 300, and then we made cuts in some of those other articles and our capital, spend out of raise and appropriate every year. So kind of all that together got us to what you're getting at.
Yeah, the main point was for anybody who cares to understand it, that we didn't just say, we need a lot of money, let's go save the school. We did everything we could to cut money elsewhere also. Thank you.
Jen, I just have another question regarding the reductions, because I think that, I don't know what you can share or what, but I know at the last selectmen meeting, it was brought up that there was like this long list of what those reductions were, and those haven't been shared with the school committee, so I was just trying to see from that list what was true, what isn't true, and what decisions have been made by the school.
So I can't
in
talk
reflection.
personnel, I can talk about the statute, and I can say that we made reductions, and I can give the amount. But there were 2 reductions in force, which is the person who holds the position is gone. And there were some reduction in FTE or full-time equivalents of some positions.
Can you speak to the areas that were cut?
There were 2 positions cut, those don't affect any areas.
But I
And-
mean, the reductions in the,
We
FTE, right,
reduced
in
the FTE in the areas of unified arts, so we reduced technology and we reduced art, slightly in each case.
And those were the only 2 areas.
And then there was another reduction in non-classroom staff in an FTE by 0.2 FTE.
And that was just for one staff member?
Mm-hmm.
So 2 full positions and 3 FTEs were reduced, or 3
Correct,
people's FTE level were reduced is what,
Mhm.
kind of the sum total? Okay.
yes.
Thank you. So, I don't know who best to speak to it, but, there was a lot of concern raised about kind of the day-to-day, environment at Erving Elementary and, concerns about just overall. I'm sure you're aware of all of them, and I don't want to misspeak and misquote what was brought to us. Could you speak a little bit to that, or in terms of like, is that things that are addressed or being addressed, or, are things that are ongoing challenges? I know that it was referenced that there are a lot of behavioral and other concerns that have come out of COVID and all of that experience for, for everyone, but for the children especially, and how they're trying to process that and continue. Maybe on kind of.
I can speak in
Oh.
generalities,
Yeah,
right?
they're
I
perfect.
can't speak in
Perfect.
specifics, but we were lucky enough to receive some ESSER funding that helped fund an adjustment counselor. As we know, children aren't ready to learn if their social and emotional needs are not met. And so having the ability to have funding used to fund support for students in the social emotional realm is of benefit. Additionally, another requirement for spending the ESSER money was to support any learning gaps. 20% of that money had to be spent. And so being able to have reading interventionists and math interventionists to support academic growth and academic delays due to COVID, that is not coming out of the operating budget totally, is really beneficial. And we have that through September of 2024, that funding. And of course, the staff that is there, that isn't ESSER funded, continues to be supported through our Director of Student Support Services, our curriculum director, and of course, the principal and other staff members, because we know that the effects of COVID will be seen for the next 3 to 5 years.
I was going to ask you about funding, but you answered that too, so. how
I
long
knew
we
you were going to
have
ask
it.
that, so I put it right out there.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question, and not on what the chairman asked. I'd like to go back to the two cut positions for the preschool. How does that affect preschool?
So the numbers were indicative of needing, at this particular point, with the information we have, one preschool classroom. And so we will continue to have one preschool classroom, so the reduction in force is not impacting what we planned for next year for preschool.
But year over year, we currently have two?
This year we
separate,
did.
And
Yep.
then the plan and the adjustment is to have one.
Yes.
If I may, I just want to piggyback Superintendent Colkeen. I think there's one piece that's missing, and we have other staff in the building that are pre-K to certified. So we're not without a preschool teacher, so I think that's an important piece to remember, that part of when you do a reduction in force is then it's a shift of other staff members to different positions, and this is what I was trying to convey that night when the audio wasn't picking me up. So we did the reduction in workforce to meet the dollar amount that was requested by the school committee. So we look at the professional and the non-professional status, and then we look at every single staff member's certification in the building. So there are other staff members who hold the same certification that the two current preschool teachers have. So it becomes this shift of this person has to go, so I have to move this person here, but who can go there? So it kind of, it was a game of, I don't want to call it a game, but we had sticky notes in my office, and it was literally looking at every single grade, who holds what certification. And then, yes, those two preschool teachers did not have professional status, but there are teachers in the building with professional status with the same certification. So that's sort of the bump effect that happens. I hope that helps.
So can you assure the board and the parents here today that preschool education will be what it was?
There is a very highly qualified preschool teacher.
Okay.
For anyone watching who doesn't know, Principal Candido.
Oh, sorry, I just
No,
read it. I
it's a-
wanted to put that piece in there. That's
Most probably know you, but just in case.
Maybe.
Good?
That's
Okay,
okay.
thank you.
You're welcome.
Come on up.
Hi, Devin Gaudet. So I understand we'll have one preschool classroom. I guess the question I'm thinking is bigger than just preschool now? What was the total headcount reduction? Was it 2, 5?
2 headcount completely, and then 3 reductions in FTEs
Other
or
areas,
or
okay.
hours effectively.
So with a reduction of just one classroom but 2 teachers, will you still have the headcount to not diminish any of the other grade levels? Because if you're shifting people all around, will there then be a weak spot? Or is there a classroom with a lot less kids than everybody else that only needs 1 teacher versus in the past, other classrooms have always had 2? And then I guess to piggyback on that, how many people can we handle having a call out before you're below critical staff level and you can't cover certain classes?
So we have certified people in every grade, and as for the problem with substitute teachers, that's occurring all across the state and all across the nation. And I can't answer in specifics, but we've managed to cover classrooms as best we can this year.
Okay.
There just aren't substitutes out there.
Can you or can Principal Candido speak to, based on the staff plan, the expected student enrollment, et cetera, after the changes, how many, I understand if it was this grade or that grade or this class or that class, it may be different, but just overall, how many how many teachers could call out before you have, you know?
I could look at that. I don't have that answer this evening at all.
Is there a standard, just out of curiosity, this I really don't know, is there a standard for how many teachers we need per head count?
No.
Okay. That's all I have for now. Thanks.
Could you just clarify for me? Did you mean per student head count?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, sorry.
No, that's fine.
Jake, I have a question when you're ready.
Yes, go ahead.
I'm just looking at the Town of Irving All Departments Expenditure Report. So I don't really know who, maybe Brian can answer that. I'm not really sure who would answer that. But on page 2 of the report, it shows that there's EES track of 14,000, and it appears like it's still there, unencumbered balance, so 0% of it has been expended. Let me make sure I'm reading that correctly. And then EES event chair replacement of 12,000, and again, it looks like none of that has been sent. Is that just sitting in account somewhere?
Those are all capital projects that have been previously requested, and to date, they have not been spent by the school, so that money is sitting in those funds. Those are special articles, though, so if they were not to be expended, they'd be closed out, returned to the general fund for the voters to appropriate.
Okay.
Or at a annual or special town meeting, they could be proposed as a transfer to some other budget, rather than closed out to general fund. It's just the two ways, or they get spent for the purpose.
So that 26,000 could be reallocated to a different budget?
Correct, but they cannot,
Upon approval of town
I
meeting
was
vote.
saying, nobody gets these tables.
Nope,
has
no,
that
not
authority.
tonight.
Yes,
But just through the proper chain of events?
correct.
Yep, thank you.
Could we go back to talking staff for a minute? At our last meeting on April 10th, Mr. Burnett talked about cuts that had been made, and then we were provided with a document that's fiscal year 2019 to fiscal year 2023. That's showing that over the course, I believe Mark said there was between 9 and 12 people that had been cut. Yet this is showing that there was 28 separations with 30 new hires, and so that's actually a net of 2. So could we kind of maybe have an explanation of the cuts that Mark was referencing versus this? Because this is actually showing, like when I left and I heard Mr. Burnett speak, I went, wow, they're missing 12 people. Where did the money go? How did that happen? But this is telling a different story. So could we kind of get an explanation on that?
So some of them were retirements, some of them were people separating for other reasons. I don't believe we've made a vast amount of cuts over the past, when was this dated? 19?
Yes.
You went-
And I didn't think that, I don't know, I'm not quite sure.
And I'm
what-
not sure exactly what he was referencing
Okay.
specifically.
I'd like to speak to that if I can. So I looked through those, and it was a little hard for me to understand it, so I asked my administrative assistant to go back and look at the number of employees that the school has had since FY18, and I'd like to share that, and I think that'll help clarify a little bit. FY18, there were 52 employees. FY19, there were 53. FY20, there were 54. FY21, there was 52. FY22, there was 53. And FY23, as of yesterday, we have 49 employees in the school. So that gives the exact numbers. Something that I noticed when looking at that page 5 of our packet tonight is it shows hires, it shows departures. There are a few staff members that are missing from that. And something we have to remember is a lot of times we'll have an opening, and I'm going to use first grade. Our first grade teacher retired, and then it's internally filled from a staff member that's already here. So then we have to hire for that person. So that's sort of some of the shifting that goes on that's not always reflected in all of those numbers. So I really wanted to share the breakdown over the years of the number of staff of where we are right now.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
It is. So if I'm understanding you correctly, you're not currently 12 positions down.
We are positions down. Give me just a quick moment here. One. And I believe, and I don't want to speak for Mr. Burnett, but I think part of this could be positions, people have left and those positions haven't been filled.
Okay.
So I can use the example of an inclusion specialist. That person retired, that position wasn't filled, but those duties now are falling on our school psychologist. So though I think that may be some of it, so I just,
Okay.
again, I don't want to speak for him, but we currently, and where we are mostly have gaps, are in our area of the para-educators. We had three para-educators leave us at the end of last summer. I was only able to fill 2 of those roles, and then another person for a .4 FTE. Then I had a retirement from a para-educator this year, so now that role hasn't been filled. I had another para-educator who's no longer working here, so that role hasn't been filled. So those are really where the bigger holes are. But we have had positions that, again, someone has retired, and the inclusion specialist is a really clear example. So we didn't replace that inclusion specialist, but someone else is doing that work.
And just to clarify too, on this list that was put together, it was when the employee, what they were hired at and what they were separated at. So just, I don't know, I know you're talking about shifts, but,
Yeah.
so if a person was hired, you know what I mean, does that make sense?
I don't think I follow. Are you saying if they were hired to do?
Well,
one-
no, it doesn't reflect any of the shifting, so like if, let's say, like a para was hired and then they shifted into a classroom teacher, so if that had happened, it would have looked as if, on this sheet, it would have been a paraprofessional hired in, let's say, August of 2018, and then they separated, it would be a teacher in, say, August of 20.
So, but the net would be 0, is what you're
Right,
saying? It'd be a
exactly.
-1 or
Right, right,
+1?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, there was an example with the previous principal. Somebody was hired as a cafeteria assistant. And then from cafeteria assistant, they shifted to office assistant. And then from office assistant, they shifted to paraeducator. So they never left, they never left the building, just so to speak, but shifted to different roles, and then somebody had to be hired to replace that.
So just to reconcile a little bit, or at least for my sake, were we talking individuals who were on payroll, or are we talking FTEs with the numbers? Let me start with you.
Explain that to me, I'm not quite sure what you're asking.
So we might have someone working at a .2 FTE or 0.5 FTE. That's one person, but it's only a half FTE. Your counts are people.
My counts are
employed,
people.
right? Okay.
Yes,
And
my
your-
counts
And these
and this
positions are
is as
actual
well, right?
positions, yeah, we didn't go ahead
I
and.
just want to make sure to tie
Yeah.
it up.
Yep.
Timeline, are you saying net employees at the end of the fiscal year, mid-school year?
School year.
So if you have some leave during the year and don't get backfilled, how did that affect your total? Because like at some point in time, you might have had more than, in the fall, you could have had 54, and in the spring, you could have had 52. Where's the number coming from, right? That's what I'm asking, because you gave us
So I
a
think
number of
like this year's
employees.
current number reflects positions that haven't been filled again. So someone may
Yeah.
have left. And then we didn't fill it. In the if we're talking about para-educators.
Right,
So
if we're
the number
talking,
she's giving you is as of right now for this year,
Right.
at 49.
So maybe let me start from what I'm trying to reconcile.
Yeah, I'm not
right?
sure what you're asking,
That's
sorry.
fine, that's fine. So in the table from FY '19 to FY '20, there should have been a reduction of 1 according to the table in net employees, in total employees, sorry. Because we had a net change in 2019 of adding 2, and a net change in FY 2020 of losing 3. So between those 2 years, we should have seen a total, the reduction should have gone down 3 between FY '19 and FY '20. Your numbers are that we went up 1. So I'm trying to figure out,
Yeah.
are these the end of fiscal year employed? Where's the discrepancy?
right,
And
I'm
I-
not sure where we are
In timing,
matching. I
yeah.
can say part of the discrepancy is we're missing some people who've separated from us, from this list. So that makes a challenge, right? If 2 people, there's 2 staff members that retired but aren't on the separations. So that could be part of it. I honestly, I can't say I would have to sit with the town treasurer and really go through the numbers and look at it. Because I think there's things that, have been oversights and possibly on my numbers as well, but mine was just strictly, who were the employees for those years? So I would have to work with Jen Icorn and look a little closer at it, because there are some people who are not separated but are no longer working here, and that could be the difference.
So before I go into that, my question now, They are no longer working here, but they're not
They're
separated?
not on the separation list, no.
Okay. But they are separated.
They're gone, yeah.
Trying
They're
to
just
figure out how
not
they went
on this
separated,
list.
but-
They're
but
not on
they're
this
here.
list that I have in front of me.
I thought maybe we were
Understood.
sticking people in.
I was like, I don't know. I'm not leaving, but I'm not here. Okay.
Well, I wouldn't want that either.
So my understanding of this, and the team can correct me if I'm wrong, of the sheet we had in our packet was the total employee count on July 1, and the total employee count, and the total changes, and this is just the changes. So if we started the year in fiscal 19 with 53, 3 left, 5 were added, we should end on June 30 with 55. You gave us totals, so what I'm saying is at any point in time in the year, that total could reflect after a separation, but not every hire, a new hire. So I'm asking, where does that number come from in a timeline? That's what I meant. Is it the June 30 final, final employment? Is it the
Yeah.
July
again,
1,
I
or
just-
where was your number from?
My number is just from my administrative assistant who went through the staff list and how many employees do we have that year. That's all my number is. I don't, and I'm gonna be honest, I had a really hard time understanding page 5,
Okay,
because some of it predated me,
sure.
right? So suppose that was like my predecessor. So I went to my administrative assistant, who's my historian, and she had a little bit of a struggle trying to match this. So I'm happy to meet with Ms. Leghorn and try to get a better handle on the layout and the format of what she has for her notes and then what I have.
Okay.
But I think to go back to your question, was it 11 employees, that's where we are, right? Just to make you understand, so we can understand that.
Wait, how are we at 11 if?
No. She was asking, if Mr. Burnett said 11 employees were missing. Or not missing, I apologize. We're no longer at the school, so I wanted to clarify that for you by giving you those numbers.
Okay.
Literally a reduction in staff by 11.
Within those specific positions, I'll assume, and not to speak for Mr. Burnett either, but the staff changes over the 5 years here say that we did not have an overall reduction of 11 ever. We've
Correct?
had changes in what positions are filled,
Correct, yeah.
and it looks like over that 5-year period, the max change was 5, from the highest to the lowest. We are at the lowest today, to be fair.
Sure, yeah.
But in that way, we're not talking about FTEs, so we don't know if the level of, like, kind of hours of service is the
Correct,
same. So
yes.
that's a different
That's a different.
set of numbers,
Yeah.
not to make this more confusing. Okay, I think I got what I was looking for, so I don't know if someone had
And we
a
can bring back the
question.
analyzed data at our
Yeah.
next meeting, but it's not something we can compile.
No, I respect that, I understand. I think, I don't want to speak for the group, but I think it'd be good to just understand and maybe understand why there was a discrepancy, but at least understand what is the final determined true totals. I think everybody'd like to see that.
So we can have our
Sure.
HR coordinator.
Sure,
town treasurer,
compared to payroll and all that.
Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. Is there a follow-up question?
No, I was just gonna clarify, I think, to answer your question about when that number is, it sounds like she looked at how many staff we had that school year, so it could have just, that year, this is how many staff were in that building during that time. Yeah.
Right,
You know what I
from the
mean? So
beginning
there
to
could-
the end?
Right, so there could have been points where they started with
Sure.
50, and then they were able to find someone mid-year, and now they're at 51, and then they, changed.
Lost somebody and-
But that whole year, there were that many staff in the building at some point.
Exactly. That's, I mean, if we look
That's
at,
essentially the answer.
yeah, so if we look at this year, we started the year at 50. And then I was able to hire somebody else, so we went up to 51. And then somebody retired, we went down to 50. Then another employee was no longer working for us, then we're down to 49. So that's, you exactly.
So if you were
Yeah.
to answer, if you were to get that data from your administrative assistant, the answer would have been 51 for that year, because 51 people worked
At the
in this
start of the
building
school year.
at some point.
You got it. Yeah, thank you for that.
But I think if I followed, you lost 2, added 1, so it was a net loss of 1,
Yes.
which is what this is supposed to represent, is what is the net change, start to finish. And shifts But we have a lot, you know, for example, in the current year, we have 6 separations and 7 hires. That could be shifts in position and role within, so a person didn't necessarily leave, we didn't necessarily hire.
Correct.
It's a change. The net number is still 1, but it's +1 versus -1, but anyway.
I think for context,
I'm
it's
done.
also important to note that I can't think, and maybe you can think of, I can't think of any school district in this area that is 100% capacity as far as staff goes. So for context, everywhere is short on staff. So Erving is not individual or, you know, alone, alone in that fact. I mean, unless, I don't know,
School
you
is
work
not.
with schools, you know other
that's good
schools.
context.
I can't think of any school that's at capacity right now for staff, 100% capacity.
I don't think many businesses of any sort, anywhere
Right,
have,
but I mean, so, you know.
have the people they
just
need
For the
or
context that, yeah.
the money for them.
It's no doubt we're short. Everywhere is.
Well,
And I
I
know
have-
something that was voted on last year, I believe, that went into effect this school year, Jen, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is we upped even our sub rates to try to be competitive with other rates around and trying to be creative on how we can entice subs, but it still, you know, it is where it's at, and that is the trend that is being seen at every other school, so, you know, I think that conversation has come up a lot in different capacities, with our committee, but then on the supervisory committee as well.
Yeah, I have a question I'd like to know from the superintendent and the principal. What would be the cost of making pre-education whole without shifting staff from somewhere else to put them somewhere else? What is the cost of making pre-education whole?
So I think I would need clarity on what you mean by whole, because we do have a preschool
Well,
for FY '20.
well, you started off by saying that 2 full-time positions were cut from preschool.
Yes.
So if,
2 full-time positions were cut,
right,
Not
from,
not
specifically,
preschool itself,
okay,
the program.
okay.
The program's still there.
Coincidentally, they were in those positions, but it wasn't, you understand what we're
can
saying?
can I try?
Yeah, sure.
And tell me if I have what you're
Sure.
asking correct. I think what Bill's asking is, if we had the reduction, which impacted preschool teachers, we have a qualified preschool teacher still on staff to take on the preschool program, that in theory leaves a gap somewhere else. And
Which is.
to not have, I'm sorry?
There are no gaps because we filled all the gaps.
So the net need was less in terms of,
In terms of preschool,
in, no,
There's a
over,
teacher for every
overall.
there is a teacher for every
Yeah.
grade, one for pre-K, one for
Is-
K, all the way up.
I guess I'm assuming that there's a gap was created by that shift, and I think the question was, what would it take to undo
Right,
that, right?
right.
So if the future preschool planned teacher left somewhere, and that created a gap, and I'm not saying that a grade doesn't have a teacher, but it created a gap in the services or the level of support there, to undo that and put that person back and still have preschool, what would be the cost? Is that,
So it's more
Convoluted, I know,
complex than
but-
that, because there
I understand.
I
isn't-
don't think I understand what you're
There isn't
asking.
a
What
gap.
I can share, and this might shed some light, currently this year, we have 1 teacher per grade with the exception of grade 6, where there's 2 teachers. So, and preschool, and preschool, there's 2 teachers, thank you, whoever that was. 2 teachers in preschool, and then 1 first kindergarten teacher, 1 first grade, 1 second grade, 1 third grade, 1 fourth grade, 1 fifth grade, and 2 sixth grades. So by those 2 staff members having to have a reduction in force, having, I don't want to call it an extra, but having those 2 sixth grade Now I can take one of those teachers and have them teach another grade where they're certified. So there isn't a gap, we're not missing anybody. Is that helping answer your question?
So currently, I'm sorry, we have 2 in 6th, 2 in preschool. The plan in fiscal '24 is to have 1 in each grade.
Yes.
Correct.
And that's where the 2 reduction affects, there's shifts throughout, I'm sure, but that's the
Yes.
net effect.
Yes.
Is that we go to 1 teacher per class instead of having 2 in 2 different grades.
Correct.
Correct. And I think the piece to talk about for preschool this year is the enrollment is higher. So we're looking at 21 students this year versus next year we are at 14. So I would be having this discussion with the superintendent anyway. Would we have 2 preschool classes with 7 and 7? And is that fiscally responsible? So that's something I would be having the conversation with the superintendent, even if we weren't in this position. Do we take those 2 classes and split them? Just because preschool has traditionally been larger numbers, it's just a smaller group coming in for whatever reason, I don't know.
So that's why the answer is more complex than just giving you a number, because of the shifts in
Enrollment is
enrollment
very
and
different,
personnel.
Okay,
very different this year.
okay.
Before I ask a follow-up, does that?
Yeah, that answers my question.
Does that help? Okay.
Okay.
So what is the, if you have them off the top of your head, what is the preschool head count today or this year?
21.
21 and going to 14?
Correct.
Expected,
We have 10 in one
anticipated?
class and 11 in the other class.
Okay. And we're anticipating going to 14?
That's what is enrolled as of today.
Right. And what was the change on the 6th grade side and 5th going into 6th? Just so we have both sides of what those changes were. Like current 6th grade makeup and what the expected next year 6th grade.
I can only say that the split was based on the needs of the students.
I was asking what the count was, I'm sorry.
Oh, okay, I'm
Just-
sorry, I'm sorry.
Just what's the now, what's the then, just to
Oh,
understand
great.
that change as
I-
well, sorry.
I was going to go take, right now there's 13 6th graders, 2 different classes. And I believe next year it's 14. I don't know exactly off the top of my head. I apologize, I don't have those numbers.
And well, being sensitive to it, I gather there was a specific reason that was this year and there's not that need next year.
Yes.
And the largest class that we have currently is 1st grade, which is 18 students. That's the largest right now. And everything is less than that, minus our current preschool, but we will be graduating our 2nd-year students off to kindergarten.
And first grade is 1 first grade class?
Correct.
Thank you, that was helpful, for me at least.
Could I just add that
Please.
the administration coming here and sharing this information with us helps us all understand better. In my humble but accurate opinion, the more people understand, better off we all are. I'm not qualified to tell the administration, you ought to have 2 teachers here, 1 over there, and put a couple of paraprofessionals over there. I have no idea. I don't have a clue. My guess is, most people in the audience don't have that expertise either. That's why we pay, you get the big bucks, because you know what you're doing. You know, you run that place. And people go by and they see a whole bunch of cars in the parking lot and say, what the heck's going on over there? Everybody's got 100 cars there. Must be, 100 people working there. And it's good to know. For me, for me, I don't know if everybody else can, as complex as they want, but for me, I like it simple. You've gone from 49 to 51 to 50 to 52 to 53, now you got 49. It's not like you cut a dozen people and the school is wondering, what are you gonna do? You're ripping your hair out. But also, you're not so overstaffed. You got 1 teacher per classroom. You're not overstaffed. That should make the taxpayers happy, I would think. And I don't know if the janitor drives 2 cars to school. I have no idea why the parking lot's full or who's there. It doesn't matter. Just the kids are getting a good education. I'm confident you know what you're doing. And usually, we discuss the finances. We're sensitive about kids' needs, but we don't know the kids' needs. So we don't discuss at all, how many classroom teachers should you have, or, how many cafeteria workers should you have. But letting everybody know how many people are working there, is a good thing. How many kids you got in the class, how many teachers per class. It opens up so people don't just listen to the neighbor and say, oh my goodness, I got 3 kids in a class and 500 people working there. And it's all wrong. So getting the good information is a perfect thing. Thank you. Thank you.
And I just want to acknowledge, I appreciate trying to convey the information. There are sensitive items within the nuance of that we can't or respectfully shouldn't discuss. Finding ways to share what we need to know to understand what's happening at a high level without doing that is not easy, so thank you.
I'm glad you can hear me this meeting.
Yes. Thank you.
And Principal Candido, thank you for filling in those building level details. That was helpful.
I'm going to go get the exact enrollment right now. And I'll share it with everybody after.
Thank you. Mark?
Hey folks, Mark Burnett. Figured I'd come up since we've been talking about things I said.
Thank you.
Yeah, I made statements at that select board's meeting, and I was careful to say that these are positions that were no longer here. Definitely folks have been moved around into other spots. I'm actually reading right from the one that I shared at that meeting. And these are positions that are no longer here. So I know we're talking, it feels like semantics when we're talking, they're mentioning this number's higher here, this number's higher there or lower. I don't know about all that. I just know these positions are no longer here. So what I had shared at that last meeting was that we used to have an early childhood coordinator, and that position is no longer here. So that is a position that is, maybe they use that money for a different position, but that is no longer here. I shared that we had a behaviorist, that person retired, that position is no longer here, that program is no longer here. As well, there were 2 behaviorist assistants, so it was an entire kind of program in this classroom. That is no longer here. So when I talk about these positions, they are no longer here. They may have used that funding for other folks. We have a lot of needs in the school. There's a lot of one-on-one needs, so maybe that is where it is at. But I was feeling like some of this information, first somebody asked, is what was shared true? Yes, it is true. And then it was asked if, I guess just that. What else I shared was that 30% of classrooms do not have classroom paraeducators, which had always been the case before this. They're, our numbers are down in the school. Of course, it sounds like they're up. I don't know what to tell you, but there are 30% of classrooms do not have classroom paraeducators. There was a part-time custodian here. I think it was about 12 hours a week. That position is no longer here. Our substitute availability I talked about. We are fortunate that we have a former staff member here who basically is working full-time. She's retired and, who knows how long she will be here. But quite frankly, I think we should hire, if we had the money, 2 people just to be full-time substitutes to be able to fill in. Because some days that docket, there are 7 or 8 folks out, and it's just, we are trying to fill it wherever we can. You've mentioned the 2 preschool teachers, and so certainly when I shared that, I did not say that there was no preschool next year. I just said those positions, just for clarity. I think you folks up there get that. Yeah. When I had shared this, last we had heard that 2 math interventionists had been positions let go. We're hearing since, and when I shared that, the previous school committee meeting, there was a lengthy debate about hiring another math interventionist. If you guys will remember, they had, school committee had said they did not want that position to be put out there. So as far as I had known at the time, there was going to be 1 math interventionist. I mentioned 2 education specialist positions cut, and I should clarify which ones those are. One would be a reading specialist, an area that is still in need here. That position was cut by 20%. The other is our technology director, and that position was cut 20%. So I stand by those numbers. Whatever numbers we're coming up with elsewhere, I stand by those. Those positions are no longer full-time or here. So I just want to clarify that. And I can try to answer questions or have a conversation, even though this is a kind of unique and awkward situation when my supervisors are here and I'm politely disagreeing in a different way.
I respect and appreciate you coming up, Mark, because we are not subtly referring to things that you said and you. So I appreciate you coming up and speaking to it. I don't think anyone was trying to, if it was sounded that way, indicate that there was anyone trying to lie or deceive. It was how does all this math work, and then we got a third set of numbers that none of them tie up. So I think it's more of trying to understand. And again, I think Dan, you opened it well. We're not doing this to put anyone on trial. We're trying to really just understand.
Yeah.
No, I just to be fair.
Yeah.
I appreciate you coming up, and I'm sure it's awkward. We have positions in the table that's been referred to up here, and I can follow what you just said in those tables. So the net change in employees doesn't show that maybe, but the positions not there, we can, at least I could follow while you were saying that through some of the table where those changes happen. So I don't know if those pieces got put together before you said it, but they are here, so.
Yeah, good, and I appreciate Deb asking about that, bringing that up, so. And certainly, part of why I shared this last time was to express, as we've said, we've got a lot of things going on here. A lot of things maybe we can't specifically talk about, but they are serious behavior and emotional issues, and that is, we feel, a lot of us that work here, from not having some of those positions here. Also, we do not have a life skills program. 2 other schools I worked at had that, and that was very helpful. It's a program with at least 1 teacher, sometimes 2, and multiple educators there. I'm not saying that's a cure-all, but that's certainly something to look at in the future as well. There was one other thing, and I've lost it.
I think there was a question or comment, so if it comes back.
Sure.
Go ahead, because
Yeah.
I don't want to interrupt.
No, I just, thank you, Mark, for clarifying some of those. And while I could follow along and see people lost, but Superintendent, you had made a comment about the duties have shifted. So I guess I would just ask, when we talk about level of service that is administered to the students throughout the school, so as these people retired and positions were not refilled and they left, were those services lost, or were those services repositioned with current staff to take on that role? So, absolutely people have left, and I'm wondering what happened with those services. So when we talk about, the inclusion specialist and the behaviorists that work with them, it was an integral part of the school, and I'm wondering if those services remain, but in a different title or a different role doing those.
So there may be other positions that do those, and those are very dependent on the student needs, which fluctuate year to year depending on the students we have.
I'm not sure that answers what I was asking for. So there was a day-to-day, so that inclusion specialist worked here for quite a long time. I worked closely with her when my students were here. So there was a year-over-year service that was delivered to the students, to the elementary school, since her departure and the support staff with that. How are those needs being met? And so I can't imagine that there is not some. I know you mentioned the ESSER funds and the adjustment counselor for some of this, but the overall need that was fulfilled by those roles, how are we meeting that need? Because I can't imagine that need just went away year over year. We're only talking a couple of years. So an inclusion specialist, when we're talking about including people within our general ed classrooms in an effective and appropriate manner, I'm not going to tie 2 and 2 together, but an inclusion specialist not here and 2 out of district. We start talking about, you know, how are we meeting those needs of inclusion specialists, behavioral specialists, especially in the time of, we keep hearing about post-COVID and the trauma and the issues that are happening. What I'm asking is, all well and good if people retire, if we have to do a reduction in force, but the service, how does that get shifted? Just like we have a reduction in force, we lose the 2 staff members that are proposed to be gone, happen to be in an elementary, a preschool program, but we shift services around to ensure that the program stays. So I'm wondering, were we able to shift around? And we do this all the time, private sector as well. One person leaves and we say, all right, well, guess what? There's 7 items that person did. You get one of them, you get one of them, you get one of them, you get one of them. It all happens where the services are still met. I guess I'm just asking.
So inclusion would be a special education service,
Okay,
and we follow all of our students' IEPs, and we meet the needs of all of our students' IEPs.
so it
We
falls
have a
into
legal
the
obligation.
special education program, whoever those teachers are, whoever the coordinator is at Union 28 that oversees the special education for all, that's who's filling those shoes. I'm just trying to get clarity.
That's who's making sure that we follow all of those legal documents
Okay.
in conjunction with the liaisons and, of course, the principal.
Thank you.
As you were saying that, Mark, I think what it led me to was kind of, at least why I was looking to get counts over a period of time and understand change, is it was noted, you know, I think Dan, administration is looking at the needs and the changes year to year and, you know, reallocating and figuring out how that's the right staffing to align with the needs. And what those are, I won't presume to know what's right or wrong. That causes shifts in positions need to be filled, but it doesn't necessarily change the number of people needed to serve the population of students. I'm not saying that we didn't have positions not filled that were needed any of these years. I don't know that. But the changes year to year, except the current year, are very insignificant in total employees. We don't have FTE total, so it's not a given, but that would lend me to assume, based on just numbers, nothing further, that we shifted in some of these cases where there was positions or services that were not refilled or backfilled, that there was a shift to something different and a different need. So, I'm presuming that part of what you were sharing was an opinion that there are still some needs and we aren't addressing them because those positions aren't filled. I don't want to put words in your mouth, and if you don't want to answer that, I respect that.
I would say that the staff feels that there are needs not being met with the loss of these positions.
Thank you.
I just asked, Mark, you listed a few that were full-time, some that were reduced 30% or 20%,
20%,
whatever. Roughly over what time period was this? Was this this year or the last 2, 3, 4 years?
So the last couple, 2, 3 years. And then next year would be the 2 teaching staff, you know, along with what they already talked about earlier on. So I would say like 3 years. Yeah.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
If I could just say, from the point of view of an educator, there's 2 ways to look at it. There's the number of bodies in the room, right? And then there's the roles those bodies play. And I think that's the kind of the 2 differences that we're looking at, that these are numbers, so number of bodies in the room. And I think the point that's trying to be made is, but the roles or the positions or the needs aren't necessarily being matched or met with the number of bodies that we have currently in the school. Is that,
That's,
you
yeah.
know? I mean,
Pretty
again, I
accurate.
can speak from, you know, an educator that, sure, on paper, it looks like we have plenty of bodies, but if the roles are not there that we need, it's not filling the need, it's not fitting the need. So I think you need to look at it through
That's
those
kinda
two
what-
different lenses.
You said it better than I would have, or did, but that's what I was trying to say too, like head count, and we don't know that doesn't mean that one of those is working half the time, so it's half the service level of that position that it was, it's still a one in this table, in this exercise. And that the level of service and the types of services shift year to year, or can, based on the population of students. And so would expect to see some change personally in the positions that are and aren't filled. It doesn't mean the people have changed, but what positions are needed and filled. And I think, Scott, what you were asking in a specific area was, but have we maintained service level? Because if headcount hasn't significantly changed, the needs have shifted and the service level is still the same, then I would not presume to be concerned. But if there's a large reduction in staff, a large change in the needs that's not met, or a change in the service level from what the standard and the greater community expects is one of the best schools around, that's something I think all of us are concerned about. And it's hard to, and that's why I said this is just numbers. It's hard to take numbers and turn that into those answers. And it's hard to do it if you aren't in it every day. Thank you, Mark. If you were good, I appreciate you sitting up here unless anybody else has anything for you.
I started jotting down notes, and I'm glad I did because I forgot already. So it seems like if the head count has basically remained relatively neutral, but positions have not been refilled, could we find out what positions have been added? Because to me, what it seems like is it's not that needs have only shifted or changed, it's just there are additional needs. So what previous needs are not being met? That's kind of how I see it, especially after COVID with behavioral changes and everything else. There's an additional need. For example, we have a grant to have an additional head staff through 2024. Is that one of the head counts that we're counting? So it's a new need, but what are the previous needs? And we talked about one of the jobs that went away that we're meeting legally because of an IEP, but what other needs are not required by a lot of meat that are not being filled now? Like my son's not on an IEP. Did all of the jobs that are not filled, were they all reallocated? Because you're absolutely right, when someone disappears, you're doing this, you're doing this, you're doing this. But I know in my job, when someone goes away, maybe 50% of their job is being passed on and 50% is not a priority anymore. So did things not become priorities? We just can't fill it? You know, what does that look like?
I would shift my eyes over there. As a select board, I can't even begin to answer that. I was asking the same question, so I don't have the answer,
I
clearly.
share my stares.
So we have to meet those needs that are legal documents, whether it's a 504 plan or an IEP plan. And we don't know all the time what needs are going to be in front of us, and we plan as best we can, and we try to meet the needs. Do we always know? We continue to look at data that's collected, whether it's behavioral data or academic data, and look at the staff we have with the budget we have and meet those needs. If I can't get any more specific, because talking about a particular student's needs and are those needs being met with, I can't go into
Yeah,
that
and
level
I'm not
of
asking for
detail.
specifics, it's more around like job duties. This person always handled this type of behavior, this activity.
I think I can help.
Okay.
Well, hang on 1 second. Hang on, Devin, if you would. If we took hypothetically where we were in FY18 for level of service to the students, without any of the IEPs included, that level of service, think what you're saying is if we look today and exclude all of the staff related to an IEP, are we at the same level of service,
Right, yes.
right?
Yep.
So net of anything that is required, right? Obligatory?
Obligatory, yeah.
Thank you. Pronunciation was wrong. Are we providing the same level of service to the remaining students that don't have some special requirement that we have to meet that we were before?
So I would say we have more math interventionists. We have reading interventionists that meet those needs, because now you're not talking special education, correct?
Correct.
We're the only school that has 1.9 math coaches in Union 28. We have 2 Title I reading specialist positions, more than all of the schools in Union 28. We have a full-time adjustment counselor. Some of our schools are only at part-time. We did not have an adjustment counselor previously in my time here. We have hired a full-time Union 28 physical therapist, which is new, so that's a new level of service.
So to me, it sounds like that's where your new headcount is coming from. Net roughly 0 because we have the same number of people with additional jobs. If that makes sense.
I think what you're saying, and I was going to open with that, although I don't have the answers, is if the obligatory needs, thank you, have changed because students have, moved on to a different school, aged out, whatever that is, right? That could result in a change in workforce. And instead, that could have resulted in a new service or this type of position being filled. I'm speculating that. I guess my follow-up thought was, even if we were level to, say, FY18 in level of service, post-COVID, the level of service the students need has changed to be the same because their needs have increased across the population because of COVID. I think everybody feels, agrees, or has seen that. So have we been able to meet that?
And that's why we brought some positions in with the ESSER funding, for example.
Okay. To the little footnote I think that you had in there, are the extra positions in this table? The table we got in our packet, in terms of,
Oh, yeah,
They're
so
on
anything
Erving
that was,
payroll.
yes, anything that was. yeah,
Okay.
That's correct. Yes.
okay. So 49 in theory is inclusive of those funded by Escher, which means without that, we would be lower, I think is what you were asking.
Yeah, wonderful, yeah.
It's a
I
good
think
question.
only one position is in the
Just
ESSER.
one?
Yeah.
I think it's
Just
only the
just the
adjustment
adjustment,
counselor.
just the
Just that
counselor.
Which is a new
Okay.
position, that is an offer, that is a service, but that's the only position that is budgeted in that.
From that. Thank you.
Yeah, but I don't even see that in our table. Where are you seeing it?
The added?
The adjustment counselor.
The counselor, August the 20th.
Oh, just a counselor?
Yeah.
Okay.
And psychologist, and I think last year, that was a position that went unfilled for a little bit,
Yes,
and so it was refilled to full-time this year.
correct.
You're good. I'm good. Thank you for going back.
I want to speak to the comment about the inclusion specialist. The inclusion specialist was one of 4 special education teachers here in the building. So when we're talking about the service delivery grid or what's in an IEP or on a 504, which is another legal document, if those services were on there, those services were picked up by one of the 3 other special education teachers in the building. Our inclusion specialist was unique. For the, we can say,
Yeah, she
had
was.
a knack that's really hard to replicate. You can't post for another inclusion specialist that we had. So thinking it union-wide and looking at how to support, because not only did that person do IEP services, which were then, again, picked up by the special education teachers, how do we help with that social emotional need? And that's the piece of the adjustment counselor. So I would like to say the inclusion specialist stayed on and contracted with us last year to help with some of that carryover, to do some consulting with some kiddos, to help some of the staffing, working with some of the kids, came back and did some assessing for us, and slowly it was a hard part for all of us, right? A hard separation for all of us. But I feel confident that with our adjustment counselor, although her role is very similar, not a special education teacher, we have 3 of those, but is able to work with kids social emotionally, is able to do lunch groups, is able to do friendship groups, is able to do social skills group, along with our school psychologist, who's doing a lot of those same roles as well. And the school psychologist and the school adjustment counselor, again, will never be who our former inclusion specialist was. But I want to assure everybody that the IEP services are picked up by those 3 other special education teachers that we have. And if some of the things that our amazing inclusion specialist did was sensory break. So for those of you who don't know, sometimes a kiddo needs a break in class, right? They need a scheduled time to go into our sensory room and swing on the swing, or come into the gym and have some big body movement. So we have other staff members. Our amazing PE and health teacher is helping with that, and she's doing tiered supports for social emotional for kids who need that break in the classroom during the day. So it's kind of what you were saying and Devin was saying, it shifts, right? There's times I'm going in and I'm supporting in the role of helping a child who's having a really challenging time. And maybe they're coming to my office and we're doing a little coloring page and then they go back. So some of that role has shifted to me. Some of that role has shifted to some of our paras are helping out with that. So nothing is going, we're not losing, kids aren't losing services, and I want to just share that it's that shift of who's doing it. And I really want to give a public shout out to our PE teacher, who is absolutely amazing, who takes kids all grades, sensory breaks, incentives. They've earned their time from their incentive program, and they come in here and do exercises. She takes them into her office. They do body breaks, they do movement breaks, and we have a lot of staff doing that with kids all day. So although, again, as I say, our formal inclusion specialist, they broke the mold with her. That's an impossible position to fill. But the hard pieces of the IEP and the 504, again, that's the beauty of having 3 more special education teachers. They were able to pick up this students on her caseload and help with that.
But there's no longer the LSC program, correct?
There is not this year, no, not this year.
And is that due to staffing or other reasons?
It's due to the fact that we lost some staff at the end of the summer, and I wasn't able to hire to bring back to work with other kids, so I had a person who I wanted to run that, but losing 3 staff at the end of summer made me have to make some changes.
So do you foresee that program coming back?
I would love to. It's actually on the top of my list.
Can you inform me what that acronym stands for?
Learning Support Center.
So that's
I'm sorry?
kind of like,
Learning support center.
well, I'm not going
Thank
to
you.
say it's a life skills
Thank you.
program because it's a little bit different, but you can ask Jen or Lisa about that.
Anything else?
I just want to know, I got it. I just want to know what the acronym stands for.
You said it was a priority, but is it expected?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
You said it was a priority to fill that, and to have that, but is it going to happen?
If I can post for the jobs and hire people, I would love it to happen. And part of that staff is paras. I have some amazing paras. I have amazing special education staff. I have amazing school psychologists and adjustment counselor who can all work collectively to oversee that. It's just a matter of having the staffing. Because it was our inclusion specialist and a para educator who ran the Learning Support Center. And I was hoping to have that back this year, but with 3 people leaving in the month of August, that derailed some plans. So if I can fill those positions and be able to, I have some thoughts in mind. I don't want to say too much because some people don't know all those thoughts yet.
So maybe I'll phrase it differently, because I'm not sure that it was clear what I'm asking. With the current projected FY '24 budget, are you able to do that?
If I can fill the vacancies that I have,
Can
yes.
you fill them from a financial standpoint with the budget?
Yes. Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, the money's budgeted for it.
Okay,
Jake,
thank you.
yeah.
I understand that hiring
Yeah.
is a challenge.
The
that's a
money's
separate
budgeted
challenge.
for it, if that's what you're
They
asking,
can pay
yes.
for them
Yeah.
within that budget. Okay, thank you.
You got it.
But you tried to this year and couldn't fill it, so it's not necessarily a budget issue, it's, you couldn't find
Staffing.
employees.
You got it, yeah.
So qualified or interested or,
And really, the word's qualified,
okay.
yeah.
That's exactly, I just want to
Yeah.
separate financial from,
No, you're correct with that one.
I just have a question, if families choose to choice out because they're not satisfied with whatever might happen with the budget, what does that do to our budget and to our school? Like, how does that impact us? I know there's a lot of talk within the community that if things don't correct itself or come back to what they're used to here at Erving, that they want to choice their kids out. I actually had a parent call me today at Gill to fill out paperwork, and that is sad. I don't want kids to leave our school because of things that are happening with the budget or the staffing. So how does that impact us when families leave?
could I just ask you, to state your name for the record?
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sure.
Chris Thurston.
Thank you.
It's $5,000 for a student for school choice.
So it's a budget impact of $5,000 for each student that would do that from what's projected today. That's what I'm hearing.
Thank you.
Jackie Boyden, I'm the principal assessor. So it is an impact of $5,000, but it doesn't impact the elementary school budget because it comes off of the charges assessed to the town on the cherry sheets. So we pay for it outside of the school budget. So it, in effect, it has no effect on the elementary school budget at all. But it does cost the town $5,000 for each student that choices out. Unless I go to a charter school, and that's a slightly different formula, but it's right around that ballpark.
And we'll stay for a second, just in case I get this wrong, but for the greater audience, cherry sheets, so we hear that a bit up here, but the state will let us know how much the town generated in receipts, if you will, for different things, like if a school choice in, you get money for that, and then how much we owe for things like choice out. And the net of that, we put in our budget worksheet overall, but that affects what the total available money is to the town for budgeting every year. It does not, it's not in or out of the specific elementary school budget, it's just the overall budget. And it's not they're usually, that is not a significant part of our overall budget. From a planning perspective, it's a couple percent.
I looked it up before I came tonight. Erving currently has 28.3 students choicing out. I couldn't get the breakdown if they were at the elementary or secondary level. But for fiscal year '22, which is the latest data that's available on the website, we currently pay for 28 students to choice somewhere else. That's not charter, that's just choice.
Charter hits the cherry sheet as well.
It does. So the cherry, it's charges and receipts. The cherry sheet used to be cherry colored. That's why we call it the cherry sheet. The charges used to be green, but they just called it the charge sheet. So, yeah, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there. But yes,
Yes.
it is. In some years previously, it's been as high when we had a larger school population. It was close to $1 million. Now it's right around 500,000 to 600,000 total for the school choice and for charter schools. Well, the other one was 228, so charter schools are right around there, depending on the number of kids. I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but Brian might be able to tell you.
Pulling it up right now.
And you're saying that includes elementary and high school?
Yeah, so when the charge is on there, we only get the amount, but if you go to the Department of Education website and you go to the town of Erving, it will tell you how many students for fiscal '22 were choicing out, and that was the 28.3, and then the amount of money that was basically assessed to the town. But the administration can actually, they get the breakdown of what grades it is all the way through, so.
And because because we have, and I'm just for clarification, because we have a contract with Gil Montague for secondary, for high school, those children wouldn't be included in those numbers.
No, choice is only if we're sending out of district or not in our tuition agreement.
Okay.
So it's the students going to Marhar or any of the elementary schools, the Frontier School District, that sort of thing. It's just, they've opted to choice out. And that doesn't include your tech school education either, that's separate.
Even sixth grade, sixth grade to Turner's because.
So if
No,
a
that's a
sixth
choice.
grade goes to Turner's, that's a choice number, because you're not tuitioning, okay, you're choicing. Those sixth graders are choosing to choice in at sixth grade to Great Falls Middle School.
So it is a choice.
And then, but they should appear back on your tuition numbers when they go into seventh grade.
Seventh grade, yeah. So sixth grade is a
Yeah.
choice.
That's what I thought. And that's for 24.
Chris Thurston again. I just want to clarify, so the town pays for school choice, that doesn't come out of our school budget, is that correct?
That's correct.
But if we have to send kids out for special education, that comes out of our school budget?
Correct.
Why is that?
It's the state funding mechanism of how they allocate the cherry sheet, state charges and receipts. Because they take care of the payments at the state level. They fund the money to and from, and then they send the receipts back to the town if they owe or if they're receiving money from the state.
I think the question is, why are special ed in the budget for the
Right.
school versus the cherry sheet, right?
Because school choice is governed by Mass General Law, and whether or not we tuition somebody out of our district to satisfy an IEP does not fall under that MGL as far as funding sources. It falls under the elementary school budget. It has an elementary line item, and it has to be through the elementary
So basically, if
budget.
it's a parent, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, if it's a parent's choice or a family's choice, that's why the town pays for it versus, okay, this is the school's decision,
To
they have to go
clarify,
here.
it's actually a team decision, which
Yeah.
includes parents.
Correct.
When there's a decision to
Right,
move
but
a
the
student out
parent,
of-
like,
but
if
it's
I
not
wanted
solely a
to, if I
school
wanted to
choice.
take my child out to go to X, Y, and Z school
Then that's.
in the
pa-
area, you're not, I'm solely making that choice, and that's
Correct.
what's determining who pays for what.
Yes.
Because I have a child on an IEP, so if we collectively during my IEP meeting say that my student has to go to X, Y, and Z school, it's now on the school budget to send my
Yes.
child there. But however, if my husband and I decide to take my IEP student out of here to a different school, it goes on the now town budget, is what I'm understanding, correct?
If it's a school choice decision and not a team decision through the IEP process, yes.
And I think, maybe to clarify, I believe the reasoning is the idea that the team decision to have a special need met in a different location is because we, as the school, don't feel that we'll meet that need. The team doesn't feel that we would meet that need sufficiently best by having the student here. So that's something the school couldn't do, so it's a
Correct.
school budget problem. Parents' choice to choice somewhere
Correct.
is
Okay.
is a town cost.
I just didn't understand why the
mean,
town's
am I
paying for
right in
one and
saying
not
that?
the
And it's a
other.
state program,
That's a good
right?
question.
The school
Yeah.
choice
That
program.
does seem odd.
But to just give a little context, though, if you chose to move your student out, your child out to, say, the program that we have out-of-district placement in, that cost would be yours. That wouldn't be, that's not a school choice, right? So it would be, you'd be school choicing to another public school within the Commonwealth, and you can do those. You can apply through school choice, you can see how many seats are available, you can have your name in the lottery, see if your name gets pulled, and you go to that school if you're selected. These specialized schools and some of these other, year-round schools, those don't fall into the category of school choice.
Right, right.
So I just want to be
right.
clear for those in the audience that are like, oh, wait, we can just school choice to those schools, and
Right,
it's a
no.
whole different ballgame, it's only $5,000, and I want to be very clear,
Correct.
that's not how that
Correct.
works.
Thank you,
That's,
thank you.
Private schools also.
Correct.
Correct.
Not even
yeah.
IEP, just private school.
Just, yes,
I'm not going to NMH for $5,000.
no. If that's the case, everybody would go.
Yep.
So it brings a question just in terms of if hypothetically, a student is school choice to another public school, but then has an IEP and ends up same place that we maybe would have sent them, is the school choice cost for the town the same?
Can you ask that again?
Sure.
I have the answer.
Well, if no one understands the question, that's not going to help. Hang on.
All right, now.
I think you can answer it, but is the cost for a student that's choiced out that has an IEP the same as a student that choiced out that does not? Maybe that's clearer to the town, cost to the town. Because we're saying it's $5,000 on the cherry sheet, for example, or charges that for a school choice student. If the school choice student then has an IEP and has that greater expense
I believe it's up to $8,000.
from whatever, but it's not, but we're not talking that whole cost like it is if it's,
Well, if it's a school choice with special education, I think it's up to $8,500.
but it wouldn't necessarily be the whole cost like it is if the student is in Erving Elementary and then placed, based on that need, where we're,
So
can be
an Erving
significantly
student
more.
is school choicing to
Sure, more hard.
Orange
Anywhere, sure.
and
Then
with a
needs-
special need, or they've discovered a special need?
Either way, the cost to Erving
And then there is
is
some
much less.
reimbursement, and I believe Director Whistler could speak, there are those special education increments, correct? That the state reimburses. for those
So that other district would absorb those costs, those extra costs. And that's part of that conversation when
Yes.
we talk about, do we want to open up school choice or do we not want to open up school choice? Because then we would be that receiving district that could possibly have those
Incur
extra
costs.
costs. Yeah.
Did you want to add to that?
Right, so under, 1993 Education Reform Act, and they started school choice. The only reason I even know all about this is because I was on the school committee at the time, and we got a big education on it. So the cost hasn't changed in 30 years, right? It's $5,000 per student. They might have had a provision if you have a special education student that exceeds a certain amount to $8,500, but it's my understanding that it's just the basic $5,000. The reimbursements would go to the receiving school that's educating for the IEP needs. It wouldn't come to us.
Right.
So, yeah, and that's the dilemma that schools often have, whether or not they're going to participate in school choice. Because if there are extra services needed, the receiving school has to absorb the whole cost. The sending school, the community gets away cheap. They are only paying $5,000, right? So that's the dilemma and the dialogue, the discussion that goes on all the time with school choice. So the answer is no, that it's just a straight 5,000, or if it is 8,500 now, which still isn't enough to cover what you have for when you have an IEP or a 504 and you need special services. It's just the straight.
Can I, Jackie may know, or somebody, could I ask, what's the current tuition for a student going to Turner's, Montague High School, do you know?
I'm not sure what the tuition is. You can look it up, but I know what do we get charged? I mean, that's our tuition rate. What are they charging us per student?
Approximately 11,000-ish
So, if-
for us to pay, you mean for Irving students to go to?
right,
Yes.
so tuition
Per pupil.
tuition to Gil Montague is around 11,000-ish or so. So if an Irving student decides to go somewhere else, then the state assesses us 5,000.
That is correct.
It costs us 5,000.
And it's outside of the school budgets.
Right, but I know there's a formula, but in general, we're saving 11,000, so we're making $6,000 every time somebody transfers out, give or take a little. I know there's a formula to it, but in the simplest form, if the tuition is 11,000, the state charges us 5, we've gained 6,000.
If they choice out at the secondary level, yes.
Yeah.
And I
So
just,
it's not like the number may look big, 400,000 or 500,000 that they're charging us for the 20, how many students are going away, but that's offset to some degree, but we don't pay tuition for those students, which is
It could be a lot more if they
a
were
higher
going.
rate. So it's not a real killer thing.
no, I would say generally a choice student costs less, but there isn't a fixed cost to operate a school, whether that's primary, secondary.
Sure.
And that's not going to go away because there's a reduction in the number of students. So that could end up that the per pupil cost of the students that are still going within tuition agreements or within our own school is higher. So the net impact is not necessarily a benefit, and I just want to clarify,
Okay.
that secondary choicing savings is in what we have in secondary budget. It will not affect the elementary school budget. It will not be savings for the elementary school budget.
Correct.
And it will not be, and it just to, that isn't going to change that. It's going to change the overall education cost to the town, but it will not change what Erving Elementary's budget is. Just to
Yeah.
clarify.
I was
Unless it's
just
sixth
gonna,
grade.
I was just gonna say, year over year, you get the new student enrollments for, say, our tuition to Gil Montague. You'll see the per student cost fluctuate year over year. So while it's the simplistic form to say it cost 11 or it cost 5, if 40 students left the school, that 11,000 might jump to 13 or 14, right? So it's
not a direct.
it's not a direct relationship. So, you know, the overall cost as we have more students going or coming fluctuates year over year. And that's why they redo the calculations each and every year based on the enrollment in October or September, sometimes December.
Other questions, comments, concerns from anyone?
I mean, I have other questions, but they're not related to sort of the elementary climate, culture, services. They're more direct questions related to budget, because we had it on there about
Yeah, budget as well, yep,
this fiscal year.
yep, I called for both, so.
Yeah,
Good
that's
for
what,
game.
so I don't want to rush
wanna
anybody into that
shift, keep
conversation.
focus,
I don't
yeah.
want to shift. If there's still people that are looking to comment or have questions, otherwise I would shift the question. I'll pose the other question. Previously, at a special town meeting, there was a request for 308. We put in for the 150 and held back the 158, and we asked the school committee and the administration to see if you can encompass that in the current budget. And we're getting down into, now we're in May, so we have May and June, and I'm wondering if there's any thoughts on where we sit with that, because we're going to be planning another special town meeting in June. So we need to know where we're at for that, for those finances. And I don't know who's going to be able to answer that, or if somebody wants to come on up and let us know.
Hi, so we recently, with the signing of the bargaining agreement, we just did a retro pay, and so I'll have a lot better answer for you soon with some preparation.
Could we put a date on that, just because I know it feels like we haven't done annual, because that's next week, but June's not far away.
About a week or so.
Okay.
I just want to see that the payrolls come out and see where the numbers are.
And just your name for the
Oh,
remote
Caitlin
audience.
Sheridan,
Thank
Director
you.
of Finance and Operations.
Appreciate it. Did that,
Yeah.
I didn't answer, but it gives us a point when we can expect to. I think our next meeting is tentatively the 22nd, so after annual.
Yeah.
So we would need it by then for sure,
Okay.
Yeah.
if we can.
Well, our meeting's on the 16th, so. Jen, can we set the 16th as the deadline? Can I get that information so we can have it for our meeting? Okay. You don't know that we then.
We can have it by the 16th, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you so much.
Other more budget-specific financial questions?
No, I'll just wait for the numbers later this month.
Do you have an update on transportation, where we're at in that process? I know I got your email, Brian, but I mean private, Erving transportation, where we are in that process?
For the special
Looking
education.
Purchasing.
Looking at procuring a van
It's
or
also
vehicle
something
for,
that we'll work on with them.
That was what
That was
Brian's
what I was
email
referring
was
to,
about.
It was about both. I should have been clear in that email.
Okay.
So,
oh, I thought you were just talking about contracts for
I
outside.
did, I should have included that, the procurement piece, we had reached out to vendors on the state contract, but we need to do additional follow-up with them.
for purchasing.
For the purchasing piece.
Oh, okay, I didn't realize that was for the purchasing. I thought you
My
were doing the
apologies.
contracts for if that fell through.
I should
this
have clarified both,
company.
because we were hoping to have both options for you all to compare and
I
contrast.
understand, okay. So, just not to put pressure, but are we thinking the 16th that will be available, or no?
I can likely get the cost of vehicles for them. I don't know if we can cost out what a staffing cost would look like. That's beyond what I have access to. And then I think the current quote process is by May 19th, so you may not have an answer on that question by the 16th, but
Okay,
you should have the information soon after that.
okay, thanks.
Other questions?
I don't have a budget question, a comment when you're done with your budget stuff.
You can make the comment now unless it's a closing
Okay,
comment.
well, I think it was Chris had asked a question about somebody talked to you about, choicing out. And for me, it's awkward because we're trying to make decisions about kids, but they're your kids, they're the parents' kids. I'm a real firm believer they're not the government's kids, they're the parents' kids. What I'm hearing here today related to the budget, what I'm hearing from administration is, A, they're meeting all the legal requirements, but they're going above and beyond that. And if Susie can't read well or Johnny can't do math well, parents ought to come in and talk to administration and say, I think my kid needs help, how can you help them? Whether they get an IEP or however that goes, seems to me like the kids' needs are being met from the chair I'm sitting in. If you're a parent and you don't think your kids' needs are being met, I would encourage, talk to the school and see if you can find a way to get them met. But I don't see the administration here pulling their hair out saying, my God, the kids are all gonna leave school stupid, we don't have enough money to teach them anything. I don't hear that. I hear the kids are getting a pretty good education and you're meeting their needs. So I think that relates, to me, it relates to the budget. Can you make it work with what we're all getting here for money? Seems to me like I'm hearing, yeah, we can make it work. In a perfect world, might be great if you had another $1 million, but we don't have a perfect world. That's just how it seems to me. And hopefully that would encourage people to not choice out, stay here in school, and talk with administration if they think their kids need something different. Just my opinion.
Brian, I'm going to look to you on this. The data in, what is, I believe, our second page. The tables over the last 5 fiscal years. The elementary annual budget number is what was approved,
It was appropriated.
appropriated in all town special meetings for that period. And for current year, inclusive of the last special allocation of 150.
The current year includes March 6th special town meeting, yes.
It does not take away the unexpended in the following table.
No,
So the net spend would be the difference.
correct.
Okay.
The net spend and encumbered.
Right. And I only ask because I'm looking at that, and of course, the current year, I'm just going to assume we're at least at where we are funded. We know that might be higher, but I'm seeing like 3.05 in FY19, 3.17 in FY20, 3.09 in FY21, and 3.22 in FY22. Now we're at almost 3.5, 3.47, and the proposed is 3.53. If 3.47 covers it this year, I understand things will go up, but I think maybe to what you said about service level, it brings me less concern about change in budget and cost. If we are supporting it this year at 347 and the proposed budget for next year is 353, that it's not my understanding is one of the most significant drivers in the cost of the current year that we're in and why we allocated more money and the coming fiscal year are transportation and special needs. And both of those budgets are almost $300,000 higher than they were in prior years. So, in the year prior, and that was the highest year in 4 years. So, I guess I feel less like we don't have another $300,000 or $400,000 for the special needs costs. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say. I don't know if that makes sense to out loud. Other budget questions, financial questions? All right, if there aren't any, we can talk through what the process around a Prop 2.5 override is, and statutorily and public-wise. Brian, can I ask you to just kind of high level walk us through that, if you don't mind? Like the required, statutory steps.
So the packet that you all have is quite detailed. It's from the Department of Revenue.
Right.
It's the same packet for FinCom and Select Board. It's the same packet you looked at last week when you were considering IP mill. High level is if there is a certain amount, I should back up. Last week when you were talking about it, you were looking at a debt exclusion or you were looking at a one-time capital. The conversation, if you were to do something for the operating budget that you're having tonight, would be a permanent levy adjustment. So that would be something that would permanently raise in the first year the amount that's approved by the voters, if it's approved. And then years after that, it would be 2.5% on top of that new levy. And that would be the basis for setting the tax rate. So the detailed process includes town meeting votes and example language that you saw in there. It's a two-step process, so it is a town meeting approval, and it's also a town election that would have to be called, and it would have to be approved by a majority of votes at that town election as well.
Is it just a simple majority on the election? Is it just a simple majority?
My belief, Dick Newton, just real quick. Dick.
Mr. Newton? Dick?
Dick.
Could I ask you to come up? So we could get your expertise, please?
Too busy elbowing
So, go ahead. That's okay.
The question that Mackenzie had was just, if you recall the vote threshold for a special election on a 2.5 override. Is it 2/3 or just simple majority? Can we go back?
I'd have to look that up. I think it's just a special, just a simple majority, but I'm not 100% sure on that.
I believe the election is a simple majority, but let me double check.
And that's a whole, like, ballot, go to town halls, cast your vote, typical
Yes,
ballot.
yes.
Typical
I
ballot.
believe, I believe there it's just a simple majority. The actual meeting, if you had an override at a town meeting, might be more than a simple majority.
We've got the whole packet right here.
Yeah, there's just a lot of pages. We're skimming it.
I will say the finance committee could not find the answer in the packet, and we looked pretty hard.
Dick, has there ever been an override, 2.5 override?
I don't believe so, not that I can recall, not in town.
And I think this was noted before, but the only way to have an override on the ballot is if the select board puts it on.
Correct, that's my understanding. It has to come from the select board, it can't come from a citizen's petition or a vote at any town meeting, correct?
So an override or an underride is a majority, oh, that's for putting it on the ballot, sorry. And the other one's 2/3, well, there's only 3 of us, so it's the majority.
Yeah.
can we go
I will
and come back to that?
I will verify that with
Yeah, that's
council and get
Okay,
that
yeah,
answered all of you.
that's okay. We can keep on going.
Does it matter which one comes first? I don't think I got that out of there. The
I
election.
didn't think that it mattered,
the
but somebody
ballot-
said that it might actually, have to be a town meeting first and then the election afterwards. But, if that's the case, I would say something has changed over the years, because I remember at a conference one time saying they just have to happen within a certain amount of time of each other, the meeting and the election, but it didn't matter which one came first, so I will have to double check that.
And I saw in here it can be a special election. We can propose it as many times as we want to hold special elections within the proper notification times.
As far as I know.
What is the cost of the town to run a special election?
Well, sure, I've got to have poll workers and print the ballots and everything, so it'll cost the town, and have the thing programmed, you're probably looking at $2,500, $3,000, somewhere in that area.
I got a question.
Yeah, good.
So, just to be clarified, at town meeting, residents can't stand up and ask for 2.5 override. It has to come just from the select board.
They are the ones that have to determine it, to get the wording onto the ballot, and for any article that, at a future special town meeting or whatever. That is my understanding, that it cannot happen at the ATM.
I would just say people can voice what they would like. They can't move that happens. They can't change and take action of that sort at that night. Other questions on what that looks like, process? I have one, Brian, you might be able to answer, which is, so if the board, for example, presented one, was looking to do that, right, to put it on a special town meeting, put it on a ballot for fiscal '24, and we are in fiscal '24 at that point, or those things will not happen before fiscal '24 starts? Can that still impact fiscal '24's budget that way? Can we still do that?
So you're saying like this all occurred in July?
Correct.
After the start?
Can
Yeah.
we then raise what it
Correct.
is? We just probably can't do it for the current year after the tax rate has been set?
You must do it before you set the tax rate.
Okay.
You cannot have an unbalanced budget and set a tax rate.
So within the same fiscal year, you can do it until the tax rate's set?
Correct, but just with the understanding that we must
not
have a
saying you
budget for
should.
July 1st. So if
Right,
you want to
right.
vote to amend the budget in July, that's fine, you can do that before the tax rate's set. But we must have an approved budget before July 1st, otherwise everything comes to a screeching halt. We do not want that situation.
Well,
There are ways to get into the year.
correct.
We could do a month budget or
You
something.
can do a 1/12
You could
budget.
We can
a
do all
budget
kinds of
in place
things.
for
A
July
budget
1.
that keeps things functioning.
That's correct, approved by the voters.
Right, which is the most challenging timing part.
Yes.
And then, Jake, is it the select board that then decides what the dollar amount for the override is going to end up being like? Because there was some discussion about, are we overriding just the school budget? Are we overriding the entire town so that everybody's made whole? Where will that decision be made? Where and when?
When will be, if we have a discussion about possibly doing it, I would say that's the when. In the context of, are we, and if so, what is it? I think that's the when. I think to the, who decides, if I'm reading this correctly, and I'm, specifically in the ballot side, the language that would be put on the ballot for the override is solely the select boards to approve, and then submit for approval by the state before it goes to election. which would mean we would ultimately define how much that was, because we have to write or approve the language.
Correct. No,
That doesn't mean that doesn't come from others, that doesn't mean we don't just agree with
Right.
what was,
so it's a little more, convoluted, because it wouldn't make sense that if there was a discussion that there would be an amendment on the town floor for the school's budget. So it's up to the select board at that point to work with various boards and say, okay, if this passes, if it passed that night, we have choices. We don't have to do a 2.5. We can cut elsewhere, right? So that's why it's up to the select board to then look at it and say, if the voters have passed this, how do we satisfy this? Now, what the final language looks like is ours to craft and put forward to the voters. But if there's an amendment on the floor for X amount, and we decide to put forth a ballot, a 2.5, Prop 2.5 ballot that is X minus $200,000 less than what was amended, unless we're balancing the budget, it wouldn't make sense. So whatever we end up putting forward has to get to the ends of balancing the budget, whatever that is.
at least.
Correct. It
Because
can be more.
We could
You
put
can-
a higher number,
you can
and
go-
then we could potentially put an article to add that funding elsewhere
But that's
than
right,
what
right.
was
So-
amended. I think that's kind of what you were getting toward?
Yeah.
Yep.
So if there was a particular budget that was proposed and approved higher on the town meeting floor, and nothing was adjusted to offset it, now we're imbalanced.
Yep.
If we discuss an override, a reduction in some other budget, we'd have to bring a reduction back to the people to be voted on, because they've already approved the budget,
Correct.
contingent on the funding. If we were considering the override enough to fund the approved number, then that would be the number. If we felt there was other budgets that also should be funded, if we were doing an override, we could present a higher number and additional articles afterward, logically, if approved, to then fund those as well. We may also have one on there to undo the approved funding if the override doesn't pass, because we've got to get back to balance no matter what. That could be passed over
Right, you
if
can
the
set
override
it
wasn't-
as contingent on approval, so there's.
Right, either
there's-
that or, yeah, exactly.
If you want to look at a comprehensive selectman member was able to find, I don't know if you saw, it got the link sent to you, Town of Norwood, back in 2019, did an override referendum questionnaire, and it was a joint venture between school, FinCom, and select board to look at the entire town. And I had made that comment in, I don't know which meeting, we've had a
May
lot of
10th.
them.
April 10th.
April 10th, saying that, if we're going to go through the pains of creating the ballot and looking at that, and as Dan had mentioned, there was $600,000 or $700,000 or $800,000 cut from various budgets throughout the town. And in reading what Norwood did, their explanation was level of service is level of service, whether it's level of service for the school, level of service for our police, level of service for fire, level of service for any department. If we're making cuts and we want to ensure that we have longevity to provide the services we want, they came together and said, let's look at the entire town. If we're going to go through the motion, it's a great read, and Bill, thank you for finding it. They even have language in there that's a pledge about how this is going to be the one they will do for the next 5 years, and steps on how to ensure that this doesn't become a recurring thing every year, going, oh, we did one last year, let's do another 2.5 and add more to the, and so it was very well thought out. Now, can we get from where we are on May 3rd to there on May 10th? No. It's 1 week, we don't have enough capacity to make that happen, but the template is there from other towns that have done this, and it's not adversarial. It's really saying, if we are going to go there and we are going to look at the cost to the town, then let's not do this as adversaries. Let's do this as colleagues for the same end, to the same means. So,
Yeah, that was where my question originated from. And then in that, is there going to be, whatever the decision is made, say there you go for an override, will there be accompanying information to let the voters know what that means in dollar and cents to our property taxes? So will you give examples of if you make, you know, if your house is 100,000, if your house is 300,000, if your house is 500,000, so that the voters have a sense of, in dollars and cents, what that means to them. It's a very obtuse concept.
I would,
I want to know how much it's going to cost me.
I understand. If
And
only
I
that
don't
formula
think
was
I'm
simple. I would,
I was going to say, in the example that I was citing, yes, they did that. So they were able to give a table that said, here's the impact to your, to the tax base for the town, and what that rolls out to through CIP, commercial, industrial, and personal, and residential, and they had an open space. So they had that broken out in theirs to show what the impact would be, similar to what Jackie has done for us when we at our last meeting when we were talking about a potential for an override, debt exclusion override, or capital override for IP mill. There's, you know, you can break it down per 100,000, so you know if you know what your house is worth, you know what you're going to see on the impact. Their table even showed, here's the impact to our budget if this goes through, here's the impact to our budget if it doesn't go through, here's the level of service if it goes through, here's the level of service if it doesn't go through. This was, you know, I think 30-something pages of documentation in order to do an override effectively. And even if they're, even at the school level, I think when they were putting theirs in, every single line item, it's not just we want, you know, theirs was like $1.4 million, but they allocated a line item for 3,000. We're putting that back in. We're putting in a line item for 4,000. We're putting one in for 300,000. So it was very well thought out and articulated about how are you going to spend the money if we vote this back in, not just we want the lump sum and do what you want with it. So I would propose if it goes to that point, we can't find a way to balance it without a 2.5, I like this model, and we come back to the table together and we figure out how to look at it townwide.
I was asking as a taxpayer, not as a school committee member. The preface that maybe I should have moved, but, you know.
Just to go off of that question a little bit, because I don't fully understand the whole tax rate thing, but when we have the commercial contract with a company that's paying a lot of the taxes, is there a contract with them, or do they get a yearly, like, rate of what they owe each year?
they get a rate just like we do.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they haven't, like, signed in on something like for the next 5 years, this is what we're paying?
No, it's a
They don't
tax
have a
rate.
pilot or anything like
It's
that.
a tax
no.
rate, yeah, we don't have pilots.
We
Well, we
have
have-
a
we have
pilot,
one.
At least one, maybe
Yeah.
two.
Two now?
Yeah, we have
Okay.
2 pilots, but not, those are for
Well,
specific
we wouldn't cover their costs. if there
taxables.
was a contract, you know what I mean? Yep.
Other questions? I know, yes.
I do have a question, but
Dick.
it's more of a response when I stepped out, if we can go back for a second.
Yes, if you would come up though.
And I apologize, because I did step out for a minute to say goodnight to the kids, and came back in. I had asked Chris, did I miss anything? And I missed a comment about something around parents.
Yeah, so I guess it was in reference to what I had said, and you responded saying that from your seat, it looks like everything is being met, the budget is fine, the school is running well, kids are getting what they need for an education. But I was telling Devin, what I feel like is not being heard is that, yes, everything is being said about special education and legally things are being met. But what is happening to the kids that don't have an IEP? If I was a parent that didn't have a child on an IEP, which I do, but not in need, that there's things that are happening that are dysregulated children that are affecting the kiddos not on an IEP, that now we don't have these positions filled, that yes, they're being bandwidth out and so forth, but those parents have met with administration and they still feel that things aren't like moving forward. And then I guess what's scaring them is with the budget being retracted in hundreds of thousands of dollars and all these positions being cut or eliminated, and people being shifted around to different positions, what does this mean for next year? Everybody keeps saying everything is going to be taken care of, everything is going to be fine and hunky-dory. But as a parent, you're looking at, what is my child going to get for an education when these other people are put in these other roles? And who's to say these other educators even want to do that role? So they may choose to leave if they don't want to do that role. What does that mean? What does that look like? So I guess as a parent, there's lots of questions. I guess from your seat, it does look like everything is fine and being taken care of. I don't know, Debbie, you said it more eloquently.
And that's why one of the first questions I asked was, what's the critical mass for when you lose teachers? Not just from potentially them quitting, because it sounds like we're gonna have one for each grade, which is great. But what if one resigns? I know where I work, on top of that, we have 5 to 10% of our entire workforce out from short-term disability, illness, vacation, or resignation. So what does that look like if we lose 2 to 5 teachers, or 2 to 5 of the current?
Hypothetically.
Yeah, hypothetically. For me, that's why I'm asking, because potentially needs might not be met. They're being mostly met right now at current head level, but when you reduce staff, will they be met? Or how will we shuffle those responsibilities? I think that's the concern the parents are bringing up now. This is us engaging in the conversation, saying, hey, we think there's a problem.
Well, and there's a lot of children who are dysregulated due to COVID, not to mention the kiddos that are already dysregulated due to other circumstances. But then you have kiddos that are kind of going along that aren't on IEPs, and they can't be put on IEPs because they're not meeting the needs, but they're along for the ride. And like, what is their education looking like if we're cutting these different things? And I feel bad that Bill's question wasn't really answered. He wanted to know what it would take to run the two preschool classes in its capacity that it ran this year, and it was never answered. It was, told that it's going to be taken care of, we only need one preschool class. That's fine, but he still had a question that I think a lot of the audience, not here today, had. What does it take to run the preschool the way it did this year?
And there are very serious parents who are considering removing their families from the town. At the last meeting, one parent said, yeah, we're considering moving. I know of other parents who are considering registering their children elsewhere.
Correct.
So it's a conversation. It's not just hypothetical. It's going to happen. And I had another thought and I lost it immediately, but I'll come
Sorry.
back. No, it's okay.
So before you do, Dan, I just want to clarify a couple things. So I appreciate why you stepped out, but we did offer plenty of time for more questions. There were none, so a majority of the administration did leave because we did move on from anything other than how does a 2.5 override work, anything school budget, et cetera. So I'm not sure that the right people to answer that are here or will be, so it might just be a
It was more of
comment.
a response
Just
to
so you
say,
know,
hey, we were.
just to
we
be
were-
fair to them, and they
Yeah.
stayed for a long time and tried to answer what they could. I want to acknowledge that. Maybe to elaborate on what wasn't answered around the preschool costs, there's 2 parts to that. One was that I believe the way, if I recall, the principal conveyed that was the projected needs for the classes next year do not require 2 teachers in either class. Requires, probably not the right word. It doesn't look like that's needed to maintain the service level. So those 2 net impact shouldn't be a service level impact because of the change in the school population in the coming year. To actually get you that number, all of the stuff that was referred to about how they get to who ends up in the newspaper talking about getting pink slipped, all of that has to be undone to the level of bringing back whatever person or position you're referring to fill again. It's not just a 1-for-1. They can't do that legally. So it's not a simple answer. The only simple answer would be funded at some hundreds of thousands larger. I mean, that's the only simple answer. And even then, it's up to the administration on, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, on where that funding goes. It doesn't mean it will fund 2 teachers in preschool or to bring those back. I only say that to say that's the reality. Even if an override passes and the school is, if, fast forward, we agree to an override, it happens, it's funded, it goes to the school budget, it doesn't mean that the things that have been adjusted down come back. Maybe they do, but maybe that's not the needs, and so that's not what the administration does with that funding. Within the buckets that they're authorized by the school committee. I think that's roughly how that would play out. Not a satisfying answer, but I just want to make sure that everybody's clear that even some of the steps that are the public's or that can happen may not get you to where the way you look at it today as a parent to that, or maybe not to better, depending on perspective and grade and all that. I don't know, but also, Superintendent Colquhoun listed a variety of positions and services that were added towards the end of that discussion. And I believe, Dan, just to include that was part of Dan's statement to why it sounded like we were serving and then some, is because there's additional services that have been added. So I just want to make sure that that was part of that. It's not just that the funding and, the numbers made sense.
I understand, because that's what I was saying.
And so and I want to let Dan respond, but
Sure.
that was an important piece of, I think, I just want to make sure that was not lost.
I wouldn't want you or anybody else to leave here thinking that I
said, oh, everything's wonderful. That's not what my impression of what I'm trying to say. What I was trying to say was if the administration came here and told us, we're ripping our hair out, the kids are all gonna leave stupid, we can't educate them, we don't know what's going on, you gotta do something, I'd have a whole different opinion. Overriding the whole thing is, we are government here, and it's parents own your kids, we don't own your kids. There's a big debate on that nationally, but it's a parent's decision. And the principal and the superintendent were shaking their head, and I said, if a parent thinks their kid is not getting, Johnny can't read well, or Susie's having trouble with math, whatever it is, none of us are qualified to fix that. We can't discuss, what some student needs. But it would be up to me, it'd be up to a parent. I went there when my kid went through the school, to go to the school and say, hey, we need help with this, how do we do it? Whether it qualifies for an IEP or not, I don't know. But it's up to the parent to go there. Hopefully, they can satisfy the parent that they're giving the kid a good education. I mean, I don't know. I can't speak to what totally satisfies a parent. Now, we do hear from some staff, obviously, think there's some more needs. But you've got a school committee, staff, union, collective bargaining stuff, and administration. We don't usually deal with that stuff. It's just not, we're not qualified. We don't stick our nose in that business because we don't know how to do it. But certainly, we want the kids to get a good education. And however, I don't think it's a part of government to look at each kid in any way. It's up to parents. It's just, some parents care. And I saw it when my kid went through school. Some parents never showed up for anything. And then they get all done and say, how come my kid didn't learn as much as that kid? And, parents who care advocate for their kids, and it makes a huge difference. So I appreciate that you're here, because, there are a million people that aren't here. Well, hundreds of people that aren't here, not a million. But anyways, I didn't mean to just say, oh, yeah, everything's hunky-dory, it's all great. And I think I said in a perfect world, we'd give you $1 million and you'd all be thrilled, but we don't have extra $1 million, so,
I appreciate that.
okay.
Very good.
Yeah, thanks for letting us
So
revert back.
I just want to jump in for a second. I agree, I don't think my question was answered. But on some level, I have to, the superintendent and the principal indicated that on some level, preschool education is still going to happen. And I have to believe that statement is correct. Having said that, if the board decides and the finance committee and decide that we are going to have a override, and I would suspect that would be a comprehensive override, and maybe not. If you took the example of what Norwood did, the superintendent's office and the school committee and the finance committee and the board of selectmen all sat down together and they worked out what would stay and what wouldn't stay. And I would suspect that we would do that as well. And we'd make a point to say that this program would not be harmed in any way and would function the way it should. Having said that, we haven't reached that point, but if we do, I will, and this process isn't going to happen for a while. We just don't have the time. We're up against the gun. So I won't be a selectman after that date, but I will be in the audience as a citizen and as a past parent and a concerned Erving resident who's concerned about our school as well. And I will be pushing and arguing for exactly what the school needs.
We appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks for
I believe on the override, there was some comment at one point or question about whether or not an override in one fiscal year stayed earmarked. If it was an earmarked override, that earmark carries in future fiscal years, and it does not unless it's stabilization. So if there was a specific couple departments, one department, budget override, voted in FY24, in FY25, it's general funds to use on any budget. It is not earmarked just for that budget. So, and I'm just going to echo what Bill said. I would be in favor, if we go down this path and the board chooses to consider an override, I'm on we should consider holistically all the town services that were adjusted and determine what the comprehensive one should look like, just to be clear. But for simplification of this question, or this comment, if the board chose to put forward an override proposal to the voters for just the school budget in FY24 and it was approved, in FY25, the overall levy amount is general funds for anyone. The overridden amount is not allocated to, correct. In the following year, it's not, that portion cannot only be used for EES. You read enough of this stuff, you start talking like it, and it's confusing. Question? Comment?
I appreciate that you are, if it goes to the process of an override, you would look at other departments as well, because they've been, their budgets have been cut as well. My question is, since the select board has the authority to ask for this override, are you waiting to see what happens at town meeting? And if an amendment to increase the school budget passes, is that what is going to trigger the override discussion? Or are you folks thinking about it for other departments as well? I feel like the override discussion is only going to happen if an amendment happens on town floor to increase the school budget.
So a lot of that was specific to different people at the table, and I'm not going to speak for them. So I'll speak on my own behalf. Whether or not an override is proposed, the board, the capital planning committee, and finance committee have already come to the decision and recommendation that we go forward with an override for the IP mill. What that proposal looks like and how many years we spread it over and how we do that was the remaining question. We have not regrouped to determine what does that look like and consider putting that into language and putting it out there. So an override was a discussion that the groups had already been talking about, and because we don't have a lot of knowledge of it, trying to learn about that. Whether or not we would do an override for the operating budget, at this point, I know it's not simple, and part of it was to understand better what, as best we could, how has the budget changes expected to impact FY ~24? How has it impacted the school specifically? We obviously already spoke with the department heads and in our liaison, as our liaison positions about what that impact was if we didn't have that discussion in a board meeting, which we did too. I wouldn't be personally at this point expecting to be talking about an operating budget override. I don't think we are. We haven't discussed if we would. Even if that was a budget that was not balanced as voted at the annual town meeting, it does not mean we have to consider nor put forward an override. So we could choose not to and keep bringing it back until something else happens, or talk to other departments and figure it out. I'm not saying we would or wouldn't, but it's just, that's not an automatic. So whether or not something like that happens at the annual town meeting doesn't, for me, mean that I will or won't support an override or discuss it. I think if it's a point that one of the other select board members says they want to discuss and talk about numbers sooner or later, then I wouldn't prevent us from having that conversation either. And maybe I'd be convinced differently. That
I'll
was
jump in.
winded. Yeah, please go ahead.
I didn't think you were ever going to stop.
I didn't either.
So the trigger, yes, would be what happens on town floor because it's a week away. So the very simple answer is due to timing. We have to do all of our stuff in meetings open. We can't have discussions behind closed doors. So you see every time we talk about it, it's here at the tables in front of all of you. I made that comment. I stand behind that comment. If an override is to happen, I am not actively looking, well, I shouldn't say that. I'm actively looking at all of the budgets. I reached out to Brian last week and I said, I'd like to, relook at all of the cuts that we asked of every department and what that looks like. Is the trigger point whether or not we can get a balanced budget passed at town floor? It could be one of them. Even if it were to pass, that doesn't mean that I don't still continue to look at level of service and how we increase it in the future. If it's not for FY24, maybe it's FY25. Maybe it's mid-summer of FY24 before we get into setting the tax rate. I don't know yet. It's all happening so quick from April 10th, to now when we first heard that there'll be a push to amend the budget. It's okay, so we have to start thinking about, what does that mean? So I'm doing the background work of looking at every budget again and looking at where those funds, came from. And one trigger would be, is there an amendment that passes on the floor? The other would be, do we want to do it either way, even with a balanced budget that passes as it stands today? And I don't know, reading that document, I don't know if you had a chance to look it up. I know we had talked about it, last week. It's a great document. It really is. I would suggest you look it up, take a look at it. It really looks holistically at the town and says, how do we continue providing level of service for everyone, all residents, and our children are residents as well. So providing it to all of them. So.
And that emphasizes level of service that we are accustomed to.
Correct.
Right. That's effectively why that amendment's going to be brought, because that would be level serviced budget is what was originally proposed by the school committee back in late January-ish. And that's what you folks had asked for, and I think that's why a lot of folks in town want to see that passed, a level service budget. Okay. A clarifying question. Jake, you had mentioned that, just so I can wrap my head around it, so say an amendment passes for a budget to increase, and then, we leave that town meeting and we don't have a balanced budget. I think I'm understanding, and you can correct me, you're saying we would have to come back for another meeting. Whether or not we did an override or not, maybe the select board looks into other places to make changes, we'd still have to come back one way or another to have that discussion, because I doubt you're going to be able to make that on town meeting floor.
No, we can't. We couldn't even talk about considering it until after.
Yeah.
Depends on how that amendment is. I think it might have been in the Norwood example, but in some of the examples, the unbalanced budget that gets potentially approved in an annual town meeting can be contingent on the funding, contingent on an override. And if the override doesn't happen, it goes to what was proposed automatically without any further meetings. So it depends on how the amendment is done and what the amendment language exactly is. So for example, an amendment to increase contingent upon a 2.5 override to fund it, or funding available, even though it can be passed and it's unbalanced, that would revert if the funding doesn't become available, whether there's a meeting or a ballot or anything or not. Well, you know, a special town meeting. If we were trying to move forward with any sort of budget change in any department, override, capital, free cash movement from anywhere within it, that would be another special town meeting at least. Right? That was anything? Yeah. Okay.
So now I'm slightly concerned about the wording and making sure it's done correctly, and I certainly wouldn't want something that folks would, if it passes, people are looking for that budget to go back to where it was originally proposed. And I guess, I don't know what advice to look for. It's not necessarily your job to give us advice on how to do it, but when you just mentioned it depends on how it's proposed, I feel like we're not allowed to do contingent upon Proposition 2.5 override because that's up to you folks. So now I'm like, how exactly should we be wording this to achieve the goal that these folks are looking for?
Did you look like you wanted to say something? If you know, that's fine. Yeah, I mean, I guess that all depends on how the voters wish to, if they pass that, push that through. I mean, frankly, because if they want that to work, if the people that they've elected feel that that makes sense in what they've asked for in their opportunity to speak, and we look at that holistically and we come back with a solution to get to what was requested, fine. If there's a contingency on it and we don't do it, then that could happen. If, I believe, Brian, or anyone, correct me if I'm wrong, if it is passed without a contingency, it's just passed unbalanced, then it has to be funded or adjusted. So we would go back to special town meeting at the very least to adjust something.
Right.
Or consider an override. And even then, I believe it's at least 35 days, and where we are, I mean, to Scott's point, we talked on April 10th, I think it was the first time we formally heard that there may be a proposal for this for an operating change. We've been talking it for a capital, but not for operating. And this is the second meeting we've talked about it. So we really haven't had time to even consider if, I think, that holistically we are or aren't there, and that's part of information finding tonight for me. I believe the ballot process will take 35 days. We wouldn't be able to get an STM with the language approved by the state on a ballot and on an STM by June 30. So if changes happened at the ATM, I would expect that there will be an STM that funds some number of months into next year and allows some time to make other changes, unless the only proposal is to rebalance it.
Okay.
And I don't know what happens if that's on June 23rd, 26th, and it doesn't pass and we're still unbalanced. Everything stops until we can get another STM to balance or fund July. So that's not a good idea. So if we can not do that, I would ask we don't try to put us in that position, if possible.
So,
Am I missing?
well, no, I want to go back to your original question. You asked about language.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we do it the way
so-
we're intending.
I'm not going to guide you on how to make your amendment if you want to propose one, but what I will say is this. We have talked from the beginning, and this has been 4 or 5 months when we start budget. Any one budget, we're not trying to pit any departments against each other, right? And that's why a lot of towns will do contingent on a 2.5 override, Because if it's not contingent on a 2.5 override and it's just approved for that budget, it is one budget against another budget because it has to come out of that current budget. There was no other pool. So if it is not contingent on a 2.5, if that's the language that people are choosing and they just want to amend this section of FY24 budget known as the Erving Elementary School, and that gets increased on town floor, and there is no contingency of 2.5, we have to then choose if it's a 2.5, right? If the person making that amendment says, we're doing so contingent on the approval of a 2.5 because we don't want to see those funds have to come from other town allocated monies that are already there, that's up to their prerogative if they want to make that motion that way. That's the difference. So you talk about language of how you want to propose it, that's, and I say you because you're the one that brought it up. It'll probably be you. So, not going to beat around the bush.
Yeah.
So that's the terminology. So if you're talking about terminology, that's the safeguard of saying, I don't want to see this go through if it means it has to come from somewhere else within the current balanced budget. I would like to see it come from a 2.5 override. And that's the language.
My only concern would be is that only the the select board can bring that override. And if we put it contingent on that, you folks make the decision not to bring an override, we're stuck. So I guess that's what I was getting. I didn't even think of it until you kind of mentioned it like that, Jake, and you're just saying that's how it works. So I'll think about that some more. Thank you. All right,
And Scott
in the
makes-
weeds here.
Scott makes the good point that that's the difference, and that's why I said kind of it ties what we can and can't do, and what we can and can't consider. So how much do we want to impact others for
Right.
this? And that's the decision each voter has to make.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you look, this is, well, it was supposed to be just between you. Oh, okay.
So,
Yeah, one more.
yeah, I had something to that and I just lost it. Sir,
Good evening.
congratulations.
Thank you, James Loynd, Erving resident. Got myself into the unenviable task of filling the big shoes that Bill's presence has left. I will do my best
Thank you
to
for
honor
those
your
kind
legacy.
words.
Thank you for your service to the town. I will be part of these discussions moving forward. I'm happy to do my own research, but I would also, in the interest of time, appreciate if anyone would be willing to share that link with me so I can start educating myself sooner than later. I'm very interested in that study and what ways that we could use it. As part of this discussion, I feel it's important. I would also like to go on record that if in the future we as a board decide to move forward on an override, I would only do so if we were to make all departments whole, to move forward as a town and what's in the best interest of all departments and the town as a whole. Thank you.
That kind of leads into our FinCom meeting that we held last week. So I will just go on record with the Finance Committee and say, we agree. We feel if an override is put forth, it needs to make the town whole, and we wouldn't support it in another way.
I think each one of us has said it. I'm sorry. Was there a comment? Okay. I had something to add to what Mark was bringing up, so if it's different, but if it's not, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to, could you maybe clarify for anybody who doesn't know, ATM, STM,
Oh.
And year, because they're not, your
Sure.
year is not maybe our year.
Absolutely. So many years. Yes, I can.
But any different way.
So fiscal '24 is the town's fiscal calendar that begins on July 1st, 2023, here in a couple months, and ends on June 30, 2024. So fiscal year is usually where it ends in June that year. ATM, annual town meeting, STM, special town meeting. What I was going to add, and I think I lost Mark, unfortunately. All I was going to add to what you said, I'm not going to give advice, but we will have legal counsel at the annual town meeting. And if there's a question on what does an amendment that's proposed do, we will have a legal opinion on exactly what that will and won't do. That can be clarified. It's not that it will give someone language, but we can explain to the voters who are there what that language will happen with that language and what can and can't be done and how that binds.
Yeah.
So there will be very clear what happens if this passes that we can provide then based on the language proposed. Sir.
I just wanted to make a little, I don't know, not really an observation, but just to make everybody aware that might not be aware. You know, when you have a thing like 2.5 override, oftentimes, you know, you have people on both sides of the aisle, right? And they tend to form what's, you know, PACs, political action committees and things like that. All of that is controlled by Office of Campaign and Political Finance. If anybody decides they want to form a PAC, you need to file a bunch of paperwork. I don't even know if there'll be a lot of time to do that, but my point on all of this is that if you're going to do that as a group and not as an individual, you need to file some paperwork. If you're going to do it as an individual, you need to be very careful that you don't use town resources.
Time to go home.
You got it, Jim,
I guess
thank
it's
you.
time to go home, lights went off. But my point is you cannot, either side cannot use town resources. Even the town officials, you know, from the select board's office, you can't write a letter and send the mailing out to everybody using town materials and letterheads and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so if there's any question of any of this, you know, on the school side, teachers can't use a photocopy machine or something like that and say, here, kids, take this home to mom and dad. All right, that's a no-no. I mean, these are just some of the highlights I remember from some past trainings. We've never had this situation, so I don't know everything about it, and I only thought of it about 10 minutes ago, which is why I'm bringing it up now. I don't want anybody to, you know, because later on there might be some hurt feelings and somebody will say, oh, what can I do to get that guy or something, and, you know, hopefully that doesn't happen. But especially, we need to be careful to abide by all the rules from OCPF. So I just wanted to alert people to that. If people are interested, they offer training. I can get somebody out here, and both sides can come and hear firsthand what they expect. And I'm happy to do that if anybody wants me to set that up. So I just wanted to make that aware. Thank you.
Thank you. Especially anyone affiliated, elected, employed by the town, even more so, be careful and be aware if you're not sure. Okay. I know it's already been a long night, but I appreciate everyone sticking with us. Any other questions, comments, concerns on override? We will figure out what the majorities are required for both the ballot and the potential warrant article. Nothing else? I'll move to adjourn the joint meeting with the select board and the school committee. I'm sorry. Joint meeting with the finance committee and the school committee and continue the select board.
It's a separate meeting.
Yeah, we haven't called the single one.
It's a separate-
You really want me as a separate?
Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to adjourn this, but we're not done. Just for you guys. We're going to continue. Please, please.
We'll just
Thank you.
pause it. We'll
Yeah.
take a recess, but
We might recess for 5 or so, but we are going to continue. The board has another meeting for a little bit. It won't be long. Motion to adjourn.
second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. The select board has a few small items of business.
Yeah, I second.
Tonight as well, we will we will start that meeting at 9:55. I will call the select board meeting to order at 9:58 PM. First order of business is a tree warden position vacancy, review letters of interest and appointment. So, tree warden, Mr. Gordon was elected on Monday and has resigned again.
Not yet?
Has not yet. Oh, yeah, right.
This
No,
is to take care of-
He hasn't?
I'm sorry. He will.
Oh,
I
okay,
don't want
right,
to speak for him, but he
right.
will, before July 1,
Right.
when it takes effect, because it's not now. I'm jumping ahead. Anyway, but we still have the vacancy. We have letters of interest and need to fill that position so we can continue the tree work that needs to happen between now and then, July 1,
Got it.
when we will need to appoint a tree warden again.
Yes. One step at a time.
All right, so we have one letter from
Yes.
Glenn McCrory.
Yes.
Thank you, Glenn, for your letter of interest in that. Not too many. We don't have any other letters, so I don't think there's a big contest here.
I've lost my packet. I'm looking for it still.
That's
so
fine.
go for
I'm
it.
going to go for it. It's, I'll make a motion to appoint Glenn McCrory as a tree warden through June 30th, 2023.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye. Thank you again, sir.
Please see Town Clerk Newton to be sworn in.
Cell phone reimbursement request for the town planner.
For the policy changes to staffing that's authorized need to come before you.
Say what? Say that again?
The positions that qualify for the reimbursement for cell phones
Yes,
is a list that you maintain.
correct. And so the
So,
request is to
this is a
add
new
this
request.
position to
Is
that
to add
request.
town planner to
Town
it.
planner to the
Correct.
cell phone list
Correct.
issued.
All right, so I'll make a motion that we add the position of town planner to the authorized list of town cell phone users.
Second?
All those in favor?
Aye.
Review of the federal fiscal year 2021 Community Development Block Grant Housing Rehabilitation Program Report, quarter ending March 31st, 2023.
So we're just accepting the quarterly report?
Correct. That's
Correct.
just the quarterly report that was sent to DHCD for the grant reporting period. And that is, as the lead fiscal agent, the town gets a copy of that as well. So I don't know if that causes any questions based on what was submitted in the report.
I don't have any questions. I'm glad to see that Erving residents are using the program and other communities as well. So I make a motion, we accept the Franklin County Regional Housing and Redevelopment Authority quarterly report dated April 3rd, 2023.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Surplus property request from the town clerk for printer, first read. Any questions or concerns?
No concerns?
Done.
Bring it back next meeting for a second read. Any other business? Next meeting, so we have the ATM on Wednesday, the 10th.
Yeah, what time are we meeting again?
So I was proposing we meet at 6.
Okay.
Joint with
That's
finance.
what I thought, yeah.
Any discussion around adjustments to the ATM? If we have time, other business that we need to address before about, say, 6:30. Hopefully we can adjourn by 6:30-ish. And then
Okay.
annual at 7, and we can follow with any other business that's critical if we have to. And
Okay.
If not, we'll pass over it. Or if we,
So then,
depending on how late that goes, I mean, that may not happen, we may have to
Okay.
reschedule. But if there's other things we don't cover by 6:30-ish, I don't believe we have much piling up. The big push was for Wednesday, right? I mean, that's been the big bulk of work, so I don't think we're gonna have a lot for business anyway. Beyond that, instead of having that Monday, I was proposing we go to the 22nd and then go back to every other week and adjust if needed. There may be some other things, especially if we're doing an STM. We need to do an STM and some other things. We may have to meet more than that, but for now.
Yep.
Which would take us May 22nd, June 5th, June 19th, and then we were talking the last week for an STM.
Right.
And we may need to fit another meeting or so in there,
Yep.
depending.
And like we've always said, we're
Okay.
open to other nights if we need to.
Good enough.
Yep.
Motion.
Available.
Thank you. Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.